Hello everyone, Jordan here, and today I'm bringing you something I think is really special. About a year ago, March of 2022, I had the opportunity to play a little indie game called Tunic, about a tiny fox in a big world where you explore the wilderness, fight monsters, but most importantly, find secrets. The casual playthrough, I just blasted through in like 3 days, and it became one of my favorite games of all time. But since then, it's just snowballed. I started speedrunning the game, I now moderate the community for speedrunning, and I've had lots of opportunities to interact with the developers of this wonderful game. Most recently, I got the opportunity to sit down with Andrew Schuldeis, the creator of Tunic, for an exhaustive look back at the game. We talk about everything from his early childhood and inspirations to development of the game, to launch, and a retrospective on the game a year later. Obviously, huge spoilers for Tunic. If you have not played Tunic, what are you doing? Go play it right now, please. But if you have played Tunic and you want to hear a little bit more about its creation and what the developer thinks today, please stay tuned. I had a ton of fun. Thank you so much, Andrew, for your time, and I hope you all enjoy. I just want you to know that I put the fox shirt on, and
I saw it. I noticed. How do people typically start these? I guess just like a podcast, I would assume. Like, hi, my name, interviewer.
Let me try that. Hi, my name, interviewer.
You do in media res. Maybe this clip right here.
I think we're gonna have a good time here.
Yes.
Hello. Welcome to this wonderful video project that I'm putting together. I have here with me today Andrew Schuldeis, or as he is sometimes called, Dicey. Hello, Dicey. Andrew.
Hi.
How's it going?
It's going well. I'm here on this beautiful cloudy day. I'm really excited to talk a little bit about Tunic and the making of it.
Yeah, I guess it's probably something I should talk about why we're here. Andrew and I have we've crossed paths randomly because of this game, and it's hard to believe it's only been a year, and also that it's been a year. And I'm so interested, and I appreciate you giving me the time to dive into it. So Andrew was born in Halifax, Nova Scotia. At an early age, he became acclimated with video games through his own Nintendo Entertainment System and his neighbor's Game Boy. Formative memories include being so paralyzed by the Super Mario Bros. 1-2 Warp Zone, having never seen the words warp or zone before, that he let the timer expire. Also leafing through his neighbor's Metroid 2 manual while his neighbor played. Also experiencing similarly opaque games of the era like Zelda 1 and 2 and Star Tropics. He knew at an early age he wanted to make games and made text adventure and action games in QBasic throughout his childhood. In 2004, he attended university to focus on web development and returned to college in 2009 to pursue an honors degree in computer science, during which he took a formative course on animation. During this period, he also made a lot of friends that led to a job making hidden object games as a 2D animator, but seeking community, Andrew made friends and connections in the indie game space, participating in game jams outside of work like Ludum Dare and Train Jam, and attending trade shows like GDC. During this period, Andrew also played Dark Souls, and it, quote, hit him right in the heart with the Dungeons & Dragons like, let's go on an impossible fantasy quest thing. A couple of years later, he played the mysterious game Fez, and was so taken by its execution that he has since described us as living in a, quote, post-Fez world. Facing a future with his employer that increasingly didn't match his passion and spurred on by his indie scene friends, Andrew made a fateful decision. On February 13th, 2014, he posted this tweet, "Beloved, 2 weeks ago I quit my job to make a game about secrets and legends," and then there was a link to a vine that no longer plays, which I assume is a tiny fox running across a field of grass. Over the next 7 years, Andrew worked on Tunic, an isometric action-adventure game about a tiny fox in a big world where you explore the wilderness, fight monsters, and find secrets. Onlookers sometimes called the game Zelda Souls for its combination of evocative Zelda aesthetic and Souls-like combat tropes. Andrew admits, quote, Zelda meets Dark Souls is the tritest, most white guy makes an indie game sort of thing, but that's sort of what happened. Tunic stars a small fox because foxes are simple shapes for a beginner 3D modeler, clearly demonstrate their 3D positioning with pointy noses and bushy tails, and generally get into mischief. First working alone, he was soon assisted by Felix Kramer for production assistance, Lifeformed of Terrence Lee, and eventually Janice Kwan for music, Kevin Regami of Power Up Audio for audio design and direction, Fenji as publisher and business assistants, and Eric Billingsley of Cuphead fame for level touch-ups, bug fixes, and QA. After years of hard work, travel, trade show demos, E3 appearances, and much anticipation, Tunic released on PC, Xbox, and Game Pass on March 16th, 2022 to overwhelming critical acclaim and, quote, did numbers. It has since been released on PlayStation console and Nintendo Switch. And that's where we're at today. All right, your turn. You do me now.
Okay.
I'm just kidding.
That was incredible. This is like this is your life sort of whirlwind tour of every interview that I've ever given.
Yeah.
So, yeah, well done.
I first saw the game, I think, at Microsoft's E3 press conference in 2018. I didn't know much about it, but it was like very intriguing. It displayed well. It definitely caught my attention. I was at a convention in 2019 and was surprised to see that in the game room there was a small corner. It was like literally a dark small corner of the room that said, oh, hey, there's this demo for a game called Tunic. And I'm like, huh, that's funny. I'm pretty sure I remember that, and sat down and played it and was like, wow, this is as good as I thought it would be. That's very cool. Fast forward to 2021, there was a summer demo released on Xbox, and that was where it really turned for me, like, oh, this is cool. I should keep my eye on this, to like, whoa, okay, pencil this in for whenever this releases. But at the time, no release date. And then, yeah, fast forward to release day, which is almost exactly a year ago. And I fortunately played through the whole game in 3 days, and then it was kind of over. So I had so much fun with it that I was like, uh-oh, it's over. What do I do next? And I guess ended up at the speedrunning community just sort of as an outlet for like, how else can I continue to play this experience that has concluded? I guess because of my love for the game and just sort of wanting to try new things, submitted to a marathon. And at some point I had the idea I should probably reach out and ask if you could provide any assistance, or anybody on the team could attend, donate, or commentate. And I kind of, to my surprise, I got a response. And, on May 20th of last year, a couple of us from the community and yourself were on a digital marathon and ran Tunic any percent. And that was kind of fantastic. Over the next few months, I continued to work with the community. One night I asked to be a verifier just to try to help out a little bit more. And the owner of the community said, do you want to just take this thing off my hands? I was like, oh, okay. I wasn't ready for that, but sure. And then, I think it's just kind of snowballed from there. I ended up running a more complex category in the same organization a few months later. For some reason, I had this idea to release a 3-hour soundtrack music video around that time too. And I treasure that time, but that's one of those I look back and I'm like, okay, I guess I did that too. I was in kind of deep at that point, I think, right? And since then, it's cooled off, I think, probably for both of us on the game, I would assume. I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about that later, but some strange discoveries and glitch hunting and stuff for the game has led us to split categories quite a bit, and I've been having a lot of fun early this year, kind of re-exploring the different permutations of that leaderboard table. Yeah, I think that's kind of my perspective on it. We've actually had quite a few chances to interact, but nothing to the point where I could really like dig in, right? So I think that's sort of what I feel so lucky to be able to do today, is just go through a lot of questions and learn a lot about things that I have a lot of blind spots on, and hopefully our previous experience leads you to feel comfortable answering some of that. So
yeah, absolutely. I'm excited. I watched a video that was a video that you put together that was a summary of your experience playing the game, and it wasn't until I saw the title card day 2 that I realized, holy smokes, you are just blasting through this over the course of 3 days. And that was a great thing to watch. I've got some notes on that we can talk about at some point, because yeah, it made me realize some things with sort of a little bit of distance. Seeing someone playing it with literally fresh eyes at the time of release, nearly a year later, was a cool experience for sure.
Well, we are going to go way back in time, but before we kick things off with the timeline from your childhood to now, having given it almost a year of distance, like what is Tunic now? How, like, for anybody that's watching this that for some reason has no idea what this game is, would you still use the same elevator pitch, or do you have a new way to describe it?
Tunic is an isometric action adventure about a tiny fox big world that explodes. You know the spiel. You've given it exactly. I've seen you. You've got that pitch down. I guess you could toss in some award winning in there, which is pretty cool. And for me personally, it represents one of the most important turning points in my life was realizing that it had kind of worked for people, that there were folks out there that really sort of understood what it was and enjoyed it. And it's still a big part of my life on the day to day. There's just a surprising amount of work that still needs to go into a game product well after it's been released. But yeah, more than anything though, I think that I am grateful for everything that has happened.
Even though this is not on my sheet, can you, where are you sitting? Because I've seen this room for years at this point.
I'm sitting in a small room at the end of my apartment here in Halifax. That was one of the reasons that we thought, hey, what a good get when apartment hunting was. It's got this cool little room to finish the game in, really, because that's sort of a weird thing to think, is like, where am I going to be when this thing is finally done, having worked on it for 5 or 6 years at that point already. So anyway, my office.
That's neat. Is there anything that you display on purpose back there, or what is in this room?
Let's see here. I've got a C++ book from a million years ago.
Read it every day.
Yeah, read it every day. No, I realized that C++ has changed enough that this book is probably irrelevant, but also I don't think I want to use modern C++. It seems like an enormous nightmare. I've got some tabletop RPG books there. There's some just straight up 5e things, and also a stack of notebooks from development. Get some plants. There's an award from Fantastic Arcade there. This is a gift that one of my tabletop RPG friends sent me. It's a giant bird. Do you know what this is? Let me show this.
Excellent.
This was my original reference.
Okay, let's go all the way back to childhood. I know, obviously you've told stories about sort of initial inciting incidents for mystery and fantasy. But in general, I guess in that period of your life, were you known as the gamer kid? You know what I mean? Like I know it when I was at school, it was people knew oh, Jordan is that he's the video game guy, even if I didn't have more than 3 video games. It was just my identity somehow.
That's a good question. I kind of want to go back and sort of Ebenezer Scrooge my young self and see what I was like. Because I think I was a little bit of a weirdo. It's not like we had piles and piles of video games. I think I probably just like talked about them a lot and thought about them a lot and, had aspirations of making video games. I remember maybe the same next door neighbor that had that Game Boy saying, no, you can't make video games. Those all happen in Japan. The best you could do is maybe port them or localize them. Like, I'm sure they weren't using those words at the time, but it's sort of consensus of like, no, you can't do that. I'm just going to crush your dreams, small child. But yeah, I think I was probably the person who had video games lodged in their head pretty deeply at that point.
Do you think that was like a chip on your shoulder, like somebody telling you you can't do this, and you're like, ha, just wait, George? I have no idea what his name was, but
good question. I don't think. Sometimes I feel like a motivating force for people is this, this I'll show you. And I don't think I really had that. I feel like at some point I felt maybe I needed to cultivate that, but it's just, I don't think it's my style to be vengeful in this kind of way. So no, I never really had that, I don't think, which is probably for the best.
Like in that same period, if you showed interest in video game making or just kind of like nerdier stuff, do you feel like you had a pretty good support system around that?
That's a good question. I'm trying to, look back and think about what my social interactions were like. I was definitely a weird kid. I think there was a move that happened, like a move to a different, part of the city, different school that happened when I was at a particularly formative age socially. Like I think, I want to say 7, 8 years old sort of thing, 6, 7, 8, where you're like starting to form, actual meaningful relationships with the people around you, as opposed to just like, we're all just kids. We're playing around, like forming friend groups and that sort of thing. And I think maybe that was a little bit of a disruption in like normal social development. And so I feel like I spent a lot of time in my own head around that time. But even before that, I think I was probably the weird kid. Here's the thing that I haven't talked about, I don't think. I remember like being fascinated by the Game Boy, and I didn't have one. I don't think I ever really had like an original Game Boy, but making them out of paper, like folding paper and making a little shape that you could slide a paper cartridge into that was just a picture that appeared in a cutout on it, and having this like weird hyper focus on video games in a way that was, I guess, maybe part of that feeling of it being this somewhat unattainable, mysterious sort of thing. Like here's an artifact that I don't have access to, but I can sort of covet it and imagine what it must be like, and sort of let your imagination run wild.
Almost like engaging with the mystery was like the fun and not actually attaining it.
Yeah, totally.
Foreshadowing. The actual act of being in school at that period, was that supportive? Did a lot of your coursework kind of bore you, or was it like, did it seem to foster kind of the path you ended up on, or was it just, what was your interest level in school, I guess, overall?
Hard to say. There weren't really a whole lot of here's how computers work sort of resources. I think there was like a computer lab where you could play some black and white version of Kid Pix on maybe some Macs. But the idea of like, I'm going to learn how to program wasn't a thing. You know what? I think we had math books that had little sidebar sections about Logo, which is this sort of pseudo programming language where you describe the movements of a little carrot, a little arrowhead shape, and you could say, go forward 50, turn left 20 degrees, move forward again. You could theoretically draw pictures, but I never had access to anything that would actually do that. I don't think I've ever actually used Logo properly. Um, but I remember being really excited about the possibility of, instructing a computer about what you could do. Um, but I am somewhat envious of those who had the ability to sort of like learn programming from something that wasn't a antiquated book from the local library. Because that's, I think, actually maybe less the school system, more the public library was the place where I learned about programming. Really, like this was the thing you could do. You could tell computers what to do. I I used to think that in order to make a game, you'd need a floppy disk, and it had to be blank, and therefore you could make a game. Because if you wanted to make art, you needed a blank sheet of paper, and video games came on 3¼ inch floppy disks. So if I had a blank one of those, I could make the greatest game. All I needed was a blank disk, and you'd put it in, and it would have something on it that let you make the game. And I think maybe that was the point where someone told me like, no, you need a programming language. You need tools in order to do this. And then maybe that's where I started reading about how to program computers from books that were like, yes, the computer, an incredible tool. Maybe one day it will beat a human at chess, but that's probably not going to happen. Like these books from well before I was born. But those were good. They sort of paved the way for an understanding. And the moment that I realized, wait a second, all this stuff that I've been learning about in these books and never using, called BASIC, I have that on this Family 386. It's just called something different. It was called QBasic. I had no idea. And then suddenly the world was my oyster. I could make crappy games on the home computer.
Do you think there was any meaningful outcome to the materials and sort of constraints of what you were working on as a kid being pretty basic? Like, no pun intended, but, like if you had a much more robust IDE or something, do you feel like it would have been as meaningful?
That is a good question. I think maybe, this is maybe sort of romanticizing it a little bit, but maybe there's some truth to it, is learning about and reading about computer programming and game design, and being fascinated by the Game Boy, but not really being able to use it that much, and flipping through manuals. All of these things represent ancillary artifacts to ostensibly what is the core experience. And that allowed me as a child to let my imagination run wild. Metroid 2 could be anything. Computer programming is fascinating and wonderful. And what it means is you're never stopped by reality in that case. Nothing's, because the game is too hard, it's not going to stop me from continuing to read the manual and fantasizing about what comes next. And because I'm an idiot baby child who can't actually figure out how to do vector math or whatever, because I'm not actually doing any of the programming, I'm just thinking about it a lot and sort of daydreaming about it. It maybe cultivated feelings of mystery more deeply. Maybe if I had access to programming much earlier, maybe I would have decided that it was less interesting to me and sort of taken some different route. I don't know. Who knows?
Do you feel like any of the schooling that you had to take in high school, I'd say let's just pick high school, even if it wasn't what you wanted to do, like had some kind of impact on like the choices you made afterwards?
Yeah. So I remember in high school in particular that there was a moment when I realized never need to do math again, because I found it like quite challenging doing like calculus. And I still don't know my times tables. That was a real problem when I was in elementary school. And I think at that point, I thought, well, I'm going to be some sort of designer. I like using computers, so I'll probably be, a web designer of some kind. And I went to do a sort of 2-year technology community college course doing design and programming and a little bit of art, sort of like a generalized, we did a little bit of database work, that sort of thing. And that maybe was good in the end, even though I finished that course and immediately went on to a much more intensive, like hardcore computer science course at the university. I feel like having the experience of trying a bunch of these different things was a good way to take a lot of the things that I had been messing with as a kid and get a proper, like, real education about them. Like I had never done database stuff before, but learning about that there and getting a more solid grasp of object-oriented programming and that sort of thing would have been good. I could see an alternate version of that where if I had beelined right to CS degree, maybe that it just wouldn't have happened that way. Maybe I would have focused down too much, and some things like the more designy parts of my interest would have been lost.
Once you got into college, like there was a pretty quick transition, I think, from programming, animation, Unity, like within, I guess not a few years, several years, right? Like what was that process like? Because I feel like you've mentioned a lot that it's like you picked it up and kind of ran with it, but didn't have a really deep, training in it or anything. It seems like a kind of pretty quick jump from discipline to discipline. Like how did you manage that? What did that kind of feel like, I guess?
Well, expanding it a little bit, I think my experience going into university was, hey, I remember BASIC, where you wrote a program, hit go, and you had this sort of ready-made context for making games. You can plot pixels on the screen. It's easy. And then I feel like it just got kind of hard to do that for a long time. Like, no, you're going to need some expensive compiler, and you need to figure out windowing contexts for different operating systems. And I, at that point, just thought, like, this is too complicated, and probably had, was a little bit miffed that it wasn't as easy as it used to be. And so I didn't really do much game making for a long time. And Flash was a thing around that time, and I messed around with it a little bit, but it still wasn't exactly the same sort of experience I was hoping for. I never came across Flixel or those other ActionScript level game development environments. I wish I had. I think that would have been really cool, and I would have enjoyed it. But it wasn't until animation classes at university that I used something called GLUT, which is, I don't actually know what it stands for. It's some OpenGL, like super basic. It will handle input, and it will handle graphics output, and was sort of cross-platform, like sort of one of the most basic, hey, you want to do some OpenGL? Here you go. Here's a context in which to do that. And I loved that because it felt like programming in QBasic again. It was raw code. You could put stuff on the screen. You could do really wild stuff. And I made a game in an animation class that we were supposed to make asteroids. And I wanted to do something cool and different. And so I made this game, I think it was called like Cosmonoids. And it was, I think it's lost entirely to the depths of time now, but it was an asteroids game that was meant to look like it was on an oscilloscope. So it had like a little bit of glow around things and ghosting. It's actually using the same technique approximately as the ghosting effect in Tunic, when you're in the sort of like the spirit realms and everything has a little bit of a trail behind, where it's rendering an almost fully transparent quad as opposed to fully clearing the screen. So there's a little bit of a ghosting effect. So the same effect was done for this OpenGL game. And the other thing is that when you hit asteroids, they didn't just break up into two spherical asteroids that start overlapped and moving away. They would actually like split in half and like break into shards and stuff until they were small enough, and then they would just evaporate. And so that was really cool. Like it felt like I could flex a little bit, like do cool stuff. And that was super, super fun. Around the same time, a friend of mine who's also in the course was using Unity, which I think at the time was a Mac-only application. And it scared me a little bit because it was like, oh, it's 3D and it's a bunch of proprietary stuff and a bunch of new tools that I need to learn. But I eventually messed around with it a little bit, and that was not the tool we were using. Well, sort of the tool we were using when that same friend said, hey, you should come work at this company that I'm working for making hidden object games. We used that for a few things and switched around tools a little bit. But that was the thing that, Unity slowly got better and became cross-platform and was sort of at the time the de facto you're making a small game tool. I've forgotten the question. That was a bit of a ramble, but that was sort of the trajectory of hopping from discipline to discipline.
Yeah, I think you set me up pretty well, though. I'd love to know like how you transitioned from I don't know what I want to do to like, oh wow, this animation stuff is really liberating to okay, I guess I need a job now. Like, was that just sort of the natural progression of things, or was there something you were after? Money?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess I should clarify, the animation class in a computer science course is not here's how you rig a model and here's how to use 3D Studio Max or anything like that. Animation in the context of the computer science course that I took was here is the mathematics behind splines, right? Here's how you derive the Bézier equations, how you do inverse kinematics. Like here are a bunch of different like algorithms for the mathematics that happens behind inverse kinematics. And I think that was where we used GLUT, because it was just like, here's the super basic sort of context for doing these things, because we're mostly focusing on the math. Particle systems was another one that was there. Like here's how you would do the physics for particle systems. That was awesome. And then the professor who taught that course ended up being my supervisor for the thesis that I did for my honors degree when I was finishing up the bachelor's degree. I turned it into an honors degree by working on ocean surface simulation, which again I think used, maybe it wasn't GLUT at that point. I think it was some DirectX thing, but that was again super like mathematically based. I was working with someone else who was handling the it's not Navier-Stokes. I forget the name of the equations, the Tessendorf or something like that. Equations for doing the fast Fourier transforms to figure out what the ocean surface looks like. And the big thing that we contributed, I don't know if it was actually a contribution scientifically, or it's just an obvious thing that people do now, but we would use generated height maps at multiple resolutions, and we would add those resolutions together. So you can generate a large low resolution one and subsequent smaller ones, and you would tile those over one another. And if you get to like 4 such layers, suddenly you don't get as much repetition. That's something that happens a lot in computer graphics now. Use detail textures, I think is what they're called. You've got like a low resolution texture for your rolling hills, but then when you go in, you see that there's a bunch of gravel on the ground, and we repeat that gravel texture over the rolling hills. But at a distance, they break up one another, so the repetition is less obvious. Anyway, doing that with the ocean surface, all of which is to say, I had a bit to do with that, but the part that I had the most fun with was writing the shaders for rendering the water. Not entirely scientifically accurate, but things like, let's add a Fresnel component to add a little bit of glint, and an inverse Fresnel component so that it kind of feels like you're looking through the waves and you see this sort of like azure glow coming from within them. And here's a little bit of foam based on the acceleration of a particular point. Like that was the stuff that was the most interesting to me, not making sure that something was physically accurate, but making something look beautiful. And that was fun and great. And I worked in the same lab as my friend who was also in the animation course, blah, 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 who helped me get this job working at a company making games.
Why did you want a job?
Well, my work term was just about up, and I thought, well, this makes sense. I almost went into like neuroscience, like computational neuro stuff, which would have been a totally different trajectory for me, obviously. But I think in my heart of hearts, I knew making video games was going to be where I ended up.
I feel like it's almost selfish to say thank you for doing that, because neuroscience might have actually produced some kind of, I don't know.
Something useful, not video games, not these distractions.
This is not, yeah. That's interesting though, because I think you mentioned it earlier where you were like, I can't wait to be done with math, but then like getting that low level seemed to really spark that interest. Like, I'm not sure what my question is there, but it is very interesting that kind of diverged so far from what you expected to enjoy.
Yeah, the I don't like calculus. I don't want to take it, and then realizing, like, going into university and realizing, I need to take basically a remedial course before I can do calculus 1000, because I needed to get up to speed with a pre-calc course, and that annoyingly meant that I couldn't take physics. I wish I had taken physics. I think that would have been really cool. I had to take chemistry as my science. It was fine. I did great in the course and I had a good time. I still don't like calculus that much, but what I really liked is discrete mathematics as opposed to continuous mathematics. So yeah, calculus, just like remembering a bunch of derivative forms and chain rule and all that stuff, like, boring. But discrete math, I had a great time with, and those courses got really challenging. Like, I don't remember much about generating functions aside from the fact that they are just really brain bending. Anyway, the idea of using math as tools for logic and probability and things like that was much more interesting to me than how do I find the derivative of this entirely abstract equation. I don't know, maybe it has something to do with like latent game design aspirations or whatever, but things like how many combinations can these cards be in? What's the probability that this is going to come next? That stuff was all neat. And even the stuff like prime numbers, which is obviously more abstract, but the symbology of it, the arcane sort of glyphs that represent these very abstract concepts and how you're allowed to move them and still have it be considered a proof, was like a fun little puzzle. There's a phrase that comes up often when writing proofs, which is such that, and I hated writing it out because it was an imperfection in what it would otherwise be just this obtuse cube or square of symbology. And so I invented my own symbol for what such that should be, so that the whole thing could maintain this mystique. But I always needed to put a thing up in the corner. I was like, this symbol means such that, just so you know. To the point where the person that was marking them by the end of the course was just like, wrote next to it, "I know now. You don't need to put that each time."
So you took the job at Silverback, which is, I guess, where your friend from the animation class was working. And you stayed there for a few years, kind of during the same period that you did a lot of the game jams and stuff, indie scene stuff on the side. What was that balance like, I guess? And what was your role in the team? What did you take away positively from that experience?
So originally I was a UI artist, doing like all the buttons and stuff around the outside edge, and some programming as well. I think the very first thing I did was like cut audio and export it. So because it was a small studio, everybody was sort of jack of all tradesing it a little bit. But the reason that I was brought on was that I filled a hole, which was like I can make buttons look shiny in Photoshop, and I had a lot of fun doing that sort of stuff. We made hidden object games, which, if folks aren't familiar, are sort of point and click adventure games that are punctuated by pretty frequent mini games, many of which are, here is a picture find, like a I Spy or Where's Waldo style. Here's a list of things at the bottom. See if you can find the umbrella or the screwdriver or whatever. And that integrates into the sort of overall adventure game thing where maybe you get to keep that screwdriver and you need to use it to unscrew the plate on the wall to find another puzzle, which opens the door, which lets you go to another place. And at the time, we the people making them, sort of were a little bit derisive about the genre. And so when we got into it, it was a little bit, oh, well, I guess we have to do this now. But I ended up really enjoying it, tying back a little bit to what we said about spending a lot of time in the abstract realm of imagining about creating things. I would spend a lot of time as a kid inventing adventure game graphs, I wouldn't know to call them graphs at the time. Maybe I would have called them a flow chart or something like that. But learning, computer science and I guess discrete math a little bit, graph traversal, that's another cool thing from discrete math, I know what those are called. These are called directed acyclic graphs, and they represent dependencies. And so I was able to transfer a lot of the, not knowledge, but enthusiasm that I had as a kid for making DAGs, directed acyclic graphs, for these hidden object game puzzles. And that was cool and good. And actually, flashing forward a little bit, early on in the development of Tunic, I tried using that same technique to describe how the player would progress through the game, and pretty soon realized that the design did not like that, because everything could be circumvented. Right, that was sort of one of the philosophies behind Tunic, is that no, there's probably a way to get around this. You don't actually need the screwdriver to open this plate. You can do something else entirely. So there was a lot of valuable stuff there. During that time, I was working on game jam games, sometimes as a sort of Fridays are for fun thing at the office, but more often just a weekend let's see if I can make a game, or let's see if I can participate in this game jam. I remember finding the TIG forums and feeling like it was a momentous occasion. I didn't actually spend much time there in the end, but realizing wait a second, there are people out there and they're on the internet and they're making video games. Wow, maybe I've found my people. And it turns out that I'm just really bad at developing interpersonal relationships and engaging with community, which is something I'm trying to work on.
Relatable.
Yeah. So I didn't become a proper member of that community, but I remember that moment being wow, this is a thing that people can do.
You took these courses, you had this job. What pivoted to I really want to seek this out, or I really want to do this on the side? Did anything kind of spur it on, or was it sort of a longing,
So doing game jams is cool because you're in complete control and you're doing all of the things. And I'm a bit of a multi-classer in that sense, where I have the ability to touch in a lot of different spheres, and doing game jams therefore was kind of perfect. You get to flex in all these different ways. And at my job, I was doing that a bunch as well. So I said that I was doing UI art, but I ended up doing quite a bit of programming and a lot of game design, making these hidden object games. Did some voice work and project management and probably some sound design, lots and lots of effects design. Like I was the person that was building we called it game building, which is a really weird term to use, but it was going in and taking the art assets from the art team and building the logic for each of the sort of events that happens in the game. And part of that was doing a lot of effects, some bespoke sort of programming for special effects, stuff like that. So it was this multidisciplinary thing. And so that and game jams meant that I was trying lots and lots of stuff. And I don't remember who it was, but some person that I worked with said at some point, so like, when are you going to quit your job and make your own game? And again, maybe romanticizing, but it could be that was the thing that made me think, wait, I could, well, now that you mention it, maybe I could just do that. And I hemmed and hawed about it for a long time. I'm very slow to make decisions, especially important life-changing ones. So I imagine it was probably years that I spent thinking about maybe this is being a possibility, saving up money, that sort of thing. But the thing that I think pushed me over the edge was knowing that if I didn't, I'd always wonder what would have happened if I did. And that made it suddenly an easier decision. Not because I was like terrified or anything, but I think that was just a good nudge over the edge. And yeah, so I did it. So I put in notice, quite a bit of notice actually, and because I didn't want to leave the team high and dry, and quit my job. And on I think February 2nd, 2015, like, new project, let's go. The company was also working on some stuff that I was less interested in, and but in the end, it was what needed to happen.
I have a weirdly specific question. So one of the games you made for, I think it was Ludum Dare, one of the ones you participated in, you made a game called Our God Lives Underground. Yeah. And I could not help but see the second Ziggurat elevator and Dark Tomb, like, just right there. I was like, wow, you can just like draw the line between those things. Is that off base? Does that sound right?
No, I mean, that sounds, I probably wasn't thinking about the Dark Tomb in particular, or rather, I wasn't thinking about that game while making the Dark Tomb, but there's definitely some notes in Tunic planning that are like, a little bit like this game that I made a long time ago, where it's just as shorthand for something creepy and unknowable and impossibly huge is here. That sort of skin crawling eldritch horror sort of thing, I think is cool.
I want to send you a link. I just want you to talk to me about this photo.
This is a bunch of friends of mine hanging out at Train Jam. So Train Jam was an event that happened for a number of years where a bunch of game developers would get onto a train in Chicago, the California Zephyr, and they would take the train over the course of 3 days, I think, to Emeryville, California, just in time for the beginning of GDC, the Game Developers Conference. And what you would do is you would get on and a theme would be announced, and you would form up teams and you would work on a game while on the train. It's sort of a weird magical experience, which is a trite way to say it, but it is the feeling of being, I don't know, stuck in this tube hurtling across America with a bunch of beautiful scenery around you and a bunch of really nice people all working on cool stuff is really special. And there were a lot of people that I met there that helped guide early Tunic development in a way. And I don't mean like specifically helping with like the game itself, but just pointing me in the right direction, saying, oh, hey, this thing looks really cool. Here's some advice on how to get the most out of your time at GDC, for instance. And that was really good. It was a sort of a real world manifestation of some of the stuff that I had experienced trying to get in touch with the indie games community before that, realizing that there's a lot of cool people from a lot of different walks of life coming together and working on neat stuff and just being genuinely good people. So yeah, Train Jam is not happening anymore, but I certainly remember it fondly.
It seems like that would have been a pretty big, like, I'm somewhat interested in indie game development, and now I'm at a large San Francisco-based conference.
Yeah, well, I've been working on the game for a little bit. I think by the time I got on Train Jam, so it was probably the first one that I was on. Must have been 2016 then.
Oh, okay. So it was a little bit later. Gotcha.
Yeah, because it's in March, right? So I mean, maybe I went to the one right at when I started. I honestly don't remember. At that point, it's like, oh, here's the game that I'm working on, right? And maybe someone will be like, oh yeah, I think I've seen that on Twitter or Vine or whatever. And so I had, made some friends that way, which was really wonderful. This is something that's probably not too alien to the people watching this video, but oftentimes when I talk to folks from other industries or people that are maybe a little bit older, the idea of going to a conference and sharing your ideas and sharing what you're working on with your competitors is very, very strange to them. Like you got to patent your video game idea. Don't just go showing it to people. But that's absolutely not what the culture is like. There's so much cross-pollination of ideas and camaraderie and helping one another that happens in that space. It's really wonderful.
I mentioned it earlier, but you had a tweet that was sort of like, I quit 2 weeks ago, and here's this little, Vine, and there is a comment. They had said, like, congratulations or something, and you responded, thanks so much. I'm excited/scared meeting you guys at MRGS. That one time was a real, quote, wait, people do this moment for me. And I would like to hear, if it's something you can talk about, like what that meant to you.
MRGS is Montreal Gaming Society, I think, which, yeah, I had forgotten about that, but that was another cool moment where my brother was living in Montreal at the time, and Halifax is sort of, a couple provinces over. And so we went to visit him, and I thought, hey, this is it's a much bigger city than Halifax. I wonder if there's some game stuff happening here, like meetups or whatever. And it turns out that, yes, that very night, or maybe the next night or something like that, there was going to be this meetup at this place. And I thought, oh, neat, cool. Maybe I'll go there and see if I can see what this group of people is like and maybe make a friend. And I went in, and it was, it's this bar packed with people. I forget the name of it. And I was looking around to see if I could find, like, where are the nerds here? Where are the video game people? Thinking that I would go over it and find, a table of some cool folks in this bustling bar. And I saw someone walk by with a big armful of like 360 controllers or something. And I'm like, okay, you must be going to the right place. And I was like, hi, I'm here for the meetup thing. Where should I be headed? Like, where is it actually happening? And I forget exactly what they did, but the end result was basically, it's this. Everybody here is from the games industry. It's not like there's a little table in the back. Everyone here is here because of this event. We rent the bar. And that was just floored me. And I, at that point, was like, oh, okay, so they're setting up a projector and they're showing stuff off. And it was one of those moments, again, of, wow, yeah, there's people do this. This is there is a community out here. It's not just, people messing around by themselves. And that was deeply eye-opening. I think probably that's what that tweet is referencing.
So that day, when this tweet was posted, I mean, are you like, all right, I'm here we go, or are you like, I can't believe I've done this, you know? What on that spectrum, or is it both at the same time?
I guess probably both. I keep a journal that is a very like brass tacks what happened on each day sort of thing, and I've kept it for well over a decade now. Sometimes I have for like interviews and stuff gone back to be like, what was it actually like when I was getting started? And I remember distinctly, and also I wrote it down, being just feverish with excitement those first few days, because like a lot of projects, especially when you're excited about them, the beginning is you can get so much done, you know, within a day or a week or less. I forget, there was, or not a day, but within a week or two, there was like a working prototype. Like you could drive this little guy around, and you know, maybe there wasn't a sword, but maybe you could toss a bomb and blow up a wall. And it's just, you know, the reason I remember feeling sort of a little bit scared at how excited I was because there was just so much to do. And it's like arriving ravenous at an all-you-can-eat buffet. All these things around you are things that you're excited about eating, you know, or excited about making in this context. And so progress is really, really fast because it's easy. All the easy stuff is available to you. But it didn't take long for the reality of like, but what is this? You know, I operate almost entirely, if I don't concentrate on second by second experience as opposed to minute by minute or hour by hour experience. And so broader structure like beginning, middle, end is much harder for me to think concretely about. Like I can think abstractly about it. You know, I want this feeling to happen. I want this overall grand structure to exist. But really getting down to here are the things that happen and the things that you need to make in order to turn this into a real product at this, you know, multi-hour long game scale is much harder to me than I want to make this animation look really cool, or, you know, the ears need to bob in this way. So as development continued, the realization that like, no, that big scale stuff is stuff that you need to like really think about was at best daunting and at worst crushing.
How much groundwork has been laid for this project, whether like intentionally or not, in your mind?
The starting point was the emotion of, well, I still don't know the right word for it. It's like mystery is the best word that I usually use, but it is this feeling of having a wide open world full of potential things to explore and not knowing what the bounds of that world are, knowing that there's a lot out there and, you know, being ready to find what you can find. And I have notes from ages and ages ago that were from years before I started working on the game properly, that was trying to articulate this particular feeling of mystery. And I can talk for ages about that. Like I've got a whole GDC talk basically about that feeling that I'm going to be giving like in 2 weeks, which is a little bit scary. But that was the core thing. That was the most important piece of the foundation, I think. And a bunch of like scattered notes of, you know, what if there was a mailbox? What if there's a book you don't understand? As abstract as those things are, those are the most concrete elements that existed. Maybe the idea of like, oh, I think maybe isometric is the way to go. But the even more sort of ephemeral, cloud-like, not ephemeral, but like intangible things were a collection of notes from when I was making adventure games as a kid, you know, printing them out on a tractor-fed dot matrix printer so that I could theoretically, I don't know, like read them out to someone who was playing the game and have it be like a choose your own adventure sort of thing. I don't know. and grid-based maps of locations and a graph, a dependency graph of the things that you need to do in the order that you need to do them in. All of this stuff I had probably entirely forgotten about when I started work on the game, but I think are evidence that a lot of this stuff is just sort of baked into my brain. I think a lot of people's brains, this like, I want to be the author of a world full of adventure. So yeah, I think I was ready at that point.
Yeah, I think I don't remember where I got this quote from, but you've said like exploring and evoking the unknown was kind of that central driving motivator for the idea. I mean, I know it's been with you for most of your life, and we've kind of talked about that. But why was it that and not anything else, right? Like, because you'd been doing so many game jams, and you'd had the experience of kind of iterating with a brand new idea really quickly. Why this central concept?
It was the big project. Every idea can be, you can sort of like slot a particular idea into a project that you have. And the big project at the back of my mind was, what if it's this, grand, mysterious adventure that has all the things? Like, that's sort of the scary, dangerous, exciting part about something like this is it needs to feel infinite. It needs to feel like there's always another layer. And that requires a lot of content. And so it's very easy to be like, oh, and it'll have this, and it'll have this, and it'll have this. So this amorphous blob of a game that evokes this feeling that has all this stuff in it existed in my brain. And there was a point I remember thinking, well, what sort of game should I work on? Should I work on this small, tight, deliberate thing, probably some sort of action game that was building on maybe a prototype that I had already made that was like tight and small? Or should I really go for broke and do this stupid thing and make my first project be this sprawling adventure? And I don't know what made me decide to do one over the other, really, because I think I chose the foolish option. And maybe that's why it took 7 years.
Isn't it? And maybe I'm like misconstruing what you're saying, but it's kind of both, though, isn't it? Like, I feel like in the realm of games that people play, it is kind of like a small, tight experience in the end.
Yeah, I guess so. For a very small development team, I think it ended up being very large. Mm-hmm. When I say small, tight experience, I mean like a 2-player competitive couch game, or here's a level-based time trial arcade experience that you maybe put a couple hours into as a player. Not a game, a game defined by its design constraints, as opposed to a game defined as it feels like it goes on forever and has everything.
Right.
Yeah.
I've read that you've said that secrets was the foundation of the game before everything. Fill me in on that. What did that mean practically, like in the first few months, I guess?
It was using secrets as a way to evoke this particular feeling of mystery, of like, there's always more to understand, and further secrets underneath something. That moment of revelation where you're like, oh wait, this changes everything. I had no idea that all of this was here. Like, and one way to do that is by having the world be full of secrets that that tantalize when you don't know the answer and delight when you do. So here are the first ideas for the game. Those documents were usually lists of weird, inexplicable things, like, oh, maybe there's some, weird power grid on an island that you don't fully understand, or there are these strange switches all over the place and you don't know what they're for, like Myst or something, or there's some mysterious language that you don't understand, like in Fez, or there's this item in a cave that is totally optional and changes things and actually opens up this whole other way of playing the game, like the cape in Link to the Past or the wall jump in Metroid, something that you discover late and realize like, oh wait, this changes everything. All of those sorts of things fed into this feeling of mystery, and those often manifest as secrets, which is a term that we use very sort of generally, I guess, to capture all of those sorts of things.
Like at this point, what were you pretty confident, like this is going to be in my final product? I mean, was it anything? Was it just ideas, or is there something that like did actually see through from kind of first inception to the final thing?
There are a lot of things that I look at old notes and I think, wow, I had no idea what was going on. Hey, wait a second. This made it in, this made it in, this made it in. And it wasn't me sitting down and saying, okay, this core element is going to be here. And you can follow that thread clearly all the way to the end. It's like, it's not like I committed this particular thing early on and it maintained its way all to the end, all the way to shipping. It was, hey, I had a vague idea that, there should be, a mailbox or a language you can't read or something, and then forgot about that for years. And then those same ideas came up again and got integrated into the end product. I feel like I actually have some of that somewhere. I'm gonna get up and look at some notebooks I have back here.
Okay.
You could leave this in. Find the right book. I'm gonna see if I can find some stuff. I have this page called MISC Ideas, and one of the items says flocking behavior of birds, which I don't think made it in any way. A mailbox, definitely did. Secret tunnel system, sure.
There's a couple.
Paying for rumors like the fortune teller, not really. Bombable areas, absolutely. Haunted area, needs special item to see ghosts. That was going to be a thing for a long time, actually, was that you needed this like a special, like, I don't know, lens or something to see ghosts in like the swamp area or something, which morphed into a AoE attack that was really good at sort of revealing ghosts by hitting them once. But that never ended up making it in. Strange device in the mountains. Sure. Yeah. Okay. Power grid on island. Yes. Mm-hmm. Certain trees, some of which are special. Eyes in sockets in statues. A crater that actually was the quarry was ended up. It was going to be in a different area and represented sort of like a blasted landscape from some sort of horrible explosion, but it ended up being carved out. Dual worlds, right? That's sort of that's sort of a Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time sort of thing. People don't speak your language. Strange entity outside of town wants help from you. Good, evil. Do you start with a book or map you can't read? A side story about a character, complex, interwoven, and optional. Yeah, a lot of this stuff is getting at the same sort of emotional payload of evoking this mystery. And some of it made it in and some of it didn't. But looking back at this old stuff, I can feel myself in that mode of trying to just concoct scenarios that would sort of radiate this feeling of mystery, examples from other games that did the same sort of thing. So all of that, to answer your question, all of that was swirling around in my head at day one and was part of getting started.
I think you've mentioned at this point a few times that the language was like pretty early. Like not necessarily as okay, I know exactly how I'm going to use this. But like just as a concept, can you talk about how that came to be, or just at the early stages?
Yeah, I knew a strange language was going to be important, and that actually came up, I think, before the manual even. And once the manual idea was solidified, which again came pretty early, it made perfect sense to put the language in it a lot, but early versions of the glyph language there was more emphasis placed on people being able to sort of start to understand what things were. And I realized pretty quickly it's not going to work. It's the way it's designed it is meant to look homogeneous and inscrutable and have a certain aesthetic appeal. And that means that it's going to look like noise if people just look at it. And it's going to be really hard. Like, no one's going to look at it and be like, this stroke here is the same as this one from pages and pages ago, or on this signpost. Like that just wasn't happening. So there was this idea of adding like cartouche style individual recognizable pictograms as part of the language, but wasn't really leveraged a lot. Instead, I went for broke and said, okay, if there's something we really need people to understand, it's just going to be written in localizable text, English, whatever. But yeah, that the secret language, obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but yes, cribbed from Fez, is something that came pretty early. And the hope was it would help evoke this feeling of being in a place where you don't belong. You know, like this idea, we haven't really talked about it much, but core to this feeling of mystery is transgression. You know, doing something that you're not supposed to do, being in a place where suddenly the designer isn't looking over your shoulder. You know, you've snuck in and you're playing that Game Boy even though it's not yours. That sort of feeling is a special one to me, and that was sort of the core idea behind the language.
Well, speaking of design, early days here, I know you worked on like a lot of smaller games and the hidden object games, but did you feel like confident that like a full game design was something you had training to do? You know, like I feel like if I were to just kind of sit down and be like, yeah, I can make a game, it would be like, wait, I have never taken a course on this. I'm sure there's like academic knowledge out there to like fill in the gaps, but you know, did it feel intimidating, I guess, to kind of do the back end?
Yeah. One of the things that I realized was where I have skills and where I do not. Because you can, a game jam game, if you can, you know, do some programming and make some art and maybe even some sound effects, that's everything, right? That's not the case. There's piles and piles of things that are really challenging. And some of those things are business related. You know, how do you figure out how to run a booth at a show? How do you know how to negotiate contract stuff? I kind of figured I would need help with that and that I would be bad at it. But there are other things like game design, which are challenging, and especially so because it's insidious. Everybody sort of has an idea of what a game is like, right? It's sort of like writing. We can all do it, but doing it well is a skill, and doing it fast, like doing writing efficiently, is a rarer skill. Maybe, I don't know. It's also a skill. And so having that intuition about what's going to be a good design and what's not is something that I don't feel I had at the time, and maybe still don't have. And that's why maybe part of the reason why the game took so long is that there was a lot of iteration. There was a lot of like, this doesn't feel quite right. I don't know why, but the thing that I thought this would do, it doesn't. And I don't have any formal training in game design either. And it's fun to sort of like armchair design on stuff, but I don't really know the proper academic terms for a lot of stuff, or I don't know the things that you're not supposed to do, and I don't know the things that you're supposed to do, right? That's not meant to sound like I'm a maverick. I don't even know the rules, so I'm going to break them. But I don't know. I admire people who are able to articulate design ideas well, and I'm even more admirous of people who are just seemingly able to like tie threads together or pluck ideas out of thin air that are just really miraculous ways of solving design problems.
Well, so on top of, I guess, identifying that risk or weakness, you had also never done like a lot of 3D modeling, right? Like that was kind of a new discipline. I feel like, I mean, I'd love to hear a little bit about that, but also like, it just seems like it took an incredible well of confidence to kind of set off on this. You're like, I don't know anything about game design. I'm just starting to learn 3D modeling. I'm 100% committed to this.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it was delusional behavior at that point. Like, hey, I've made some Game Jam games and I have done a lot of game design. Surely if I set my mind to it, it will be hard, but I can do it. And that's, the sort of ridiculous faith in oneself that I consider sort of a privilege. And the 3D modeling thing, yeah, absolutely. I felt like maybe I could hone in on a low poly aesthetic and use that to my advantage. Because I think the thing that made me say, hey, isometric is really cool, was realizing that baked lighting in Unity, like this real-time sort of like pseudo-baked, like, what do they call it? Like pre-generated data that informs the runtime about how to deal with bounced light, just had some really, really appealing results visually. And I thought, like, oh, okay, this is a good direction to head. As long as I keep all the models super simple, maybe I can make this work. And it did, but eventually I needed to learn how to do like proper modeling and rigging and animation and stuff.
Do you feel like that constraint kind of was a superpower for this game, though? That you were like, I'm just going to take a lot off the table here. And I'm not, it kept you focused, or did it not really work out to help that way?
It might have originally, but the constraints that I thought I was imposing for myself were slowly eroded away at with time. Things like, it's just going to be flat colors, no texturing whatsoever. Or everything is just going to be animated in Unity. I'm not going to worry about learning the animation system in Blender. Everything's going to be low poly and flat shaded. All of those constraints slowly got eaten away at, and the game got more visually complex. And if anything becomes visually more visually complex and detailed, suddenly that needs to spill out over into the rest of the game. If I'm suddenly now this more detailed looking environment means that everything else looks unfinished, and that's a problem. So it was this, I guess you could call it scope creep, very slowly over the course of years, which was a problem, but I think worked out in the end.
Okay, so 2015, that first year, what was that like? How did you stay organized? How often did you share things? Like, I think that's one of the things I'm most interested in, just as we kind of march through the years, is like, I think from an outsider's perspective, you just kind of like disappeared for 7 years and then it was done, right? I mean, which of course is ridiculous, but I'm just kind of interested. What was your day to day like?
Yeah, early on there was a lot of again, delusional scheduling, where I thought, what if I just made a minimum viable product in like a month, beginning, middle, end, everything, just bang that out. That's like, how long does a game jam take? And I can make a complete game in that time. If I gave myself a whole month, wow, like a whole game jam working on one small part of a whole, be done in no time. It just doesn't work that way. And so there was the first year, I guess, if I had to like retroactively characterize it, was realizing that stuff takes a long time, and you can prototype stuff and build stuff, but actually getting to the finished product, like a shippable thing, is something that just takes a long time. And imagine a vast field, an infinite plane that you're standing on, and it's filled with cranks, and cranking a crank takes a lot of work. And working away at it, and you realize every other crank is stopped or is slowly rewinding somehow, and you're like, I don't even know if this is this is taking so much work, and I don't even know if it's the right crank. That's a weird analogy, but maybe another one is wandering around in the forest, and picking a direction and going, and then second guessing yourself and being like, no, it's supposed to be this way. Let me turn 90 degrees and go that way. No, that's not it. Let's go 180 degrees and go that way. And feeling like I'm constantly walking. I'm leaving footprints, right? In that sense, I'm making progress, but I don't know if I'm walking towards anything because I can't see that far ahead. I can, like I said, working on the second by second, like I'm going to make this attack animation right. I'm going to make this chest opening look nice. That's all stuff that I could fit into my brain, but I couldn't see the whole landscape or even knew exactly which direction I should be heading. And that was psychologically damaging, I think, that reality check.
In that first year, kind of before you got networked with people, what were there days where you were like, this was a bad idea? Like, I got to start making plans. Like,
Constantly. And not just that first year, for years afterwards, just thinking, how have I spent all this time? Like, where is it all gone? What am I doing? Where am I going? It was tough.
So that second to second that you said you enjoy so much kind of morphed into these vines that you would share, right? And it's hard to show. I mean, maybe I can look them up somewhere, but we're talking 6-second loops of just sort of a character animation or fancy UI or like shader or something. How important do you think those were to kind of getting networked or like established as like an in progress game? Because that's kind of the only thing most people saw like early on, right?
Yeah. R.I.P. Vine. I think that that was the thing. If I look at any individual success that this game has had and I say, but why? I can trace it back through to eventually people, like being a part of the Microsoft press conference at E3 2018, right? Would have been through Finji, and relationship with Finji was forged through working with Felix Kramer. I met Felix through at GDC, and they had seen my vines. So it all comes back to like getting the word out early on. The promotion of the game with those little animated GIFs or vines or whatever was somehow a starting point. Who knows? If I hadn't done that, maybe we wouldn't be here talking today. I feel really lucky that those caught on the way that they did, and someone was able to look at that and say, hey, this looks cool. I have no idea what this game is, no idea if it'll be done, and have that, lodge in people's brains a little bit. Because we see all kinds of stuff like that all the time, right? More so today. And I don't know, I guess there's some value in just saying, hey, I exist. Here's the thing that I'm working on.
What came first? Like a public showing or like reaching out for additional help? What kind of, or did that one beget the other, sort of?
I think it started with forging connections with other human beings. And then I think I submitted the game to Fantastic Arcade 2015, maybe 2016. And that was, I think, one of the first places where it was playable. I think might have been at Day of the Devs as well. But all of that, could be traced back to basically knowing the right people, or not even knowing the right people, but having the right people happen to see what you were looking on.
What was that reception like? I mean, did that, I guess you kind of knew to bring it to trade shows or like shows because of the connections you'd made previously, like just that awareness of like, oh, I can bring a game here. But like, what were you hoping to get out of it? Just like sanity? Like, if other people know I'm doing this, like, please help, or yeah.
it was every step along that path was at the time the most recent step. And so it was always a little bit scary. Like, is it too soon? Do people care about this? Is this the right thing to do? And it's always this big leap, like submitting the game to a show or reaching out to publishers or sending an email to a mentor. All of that was fraught with, oh no, am I doing this right? And so yeah, I don't have explicit memories about those decisions individually, but I do recall this general, like, oh wow, this goofy little thing that I'm working on is going to be at a show. That's huge. Let me fret about this a lot. And the reason for it, to answer your question, I guess, is, well, that's what you're supposed to do. I guess, that's the next thing that's supposed to happen is you gotta show it around. You gotta do the business stuff. If you want this to be a real thing, you gotta do the things that real things do.
At some point, you realize you needed help. I know, like you've mentioned before, like you kind of knew all along you were not going to do audio yourself, or at least parts of the audio. Who did you reach out to first, and sort of like how did that even come up? Was that just sort of evolved from, okay, I've reached the point where I need to do this, or was it more of a like, oh, I guess I can't do this now. I need to figure this out, right?
Music, I knew absolutely I couldn't do. I've messed around with music a couple of times, and it's always just like the most painful experience for me because some people are, I think, I can hear it in my head, but I can't make it happen, or I can see the image that I want, and I want to make it happen on the page. I don't even know if I can do that with music. So I knew that in order for something to be good, I would need to have help. And I sort of thought, oh, that's a nice, like, easily siloed off thing. So I think I reached out to Terrence Lee first because I was just infatuated with the music that he had made for the Double Fine documentary with his album called Immerse. And I listened to it a lot, and just I remember it playing in headphones while walking across, the Commons here in Halifax on a sunshiny day, and just being thrilled at these feelings of excitement and wonder and discovery, and how this music interlocked with that so well. And so I spent a lot of time listening to it while I was working on the first prototypes, those early weeks. And I reached out and I said, hey, I made this little trailer using your music. And then at the end I said, I also, I want to work together. I think that your sensibilities when it comes to music meshes with this idea really well, and he was on board with it. So we crossed paths at GDC I think that year, in 2015, and that was also where a friend of mine said, oh hey, you like secrets and you're looking for audio as well, you should talk to these folks at Power Up Audio. And I don't think Kevin was there at that like party or whatever it was that we were at, but I talked to some folks from Power Up Audio, and we realized like, oh yeah, no, you know exactly the sort of vibe that we're going for here with secrets and stuff. And I don't know if I realized it at the time, but Kevin was really into secrets, especially audio stuff. I think I sent them a build or something like that, and they sent back what they called a treatment video, or like an audio treatment, which was a video of the game with them adding sounds to it, sort of like a mini trailer focused on the audio of the game. And it was phenomenal. It was great. It was an experience that I had at that point and would continue to have throughout development, which is, oh, someone adds sounds to this and suddenly it comes alive. It's sort of this miracle of seeing something that you've worked on suddenly feel much realer, like it's a real video game now when it has sound. And so seeing that go from my crappy BFX or ZFX to like a professional was amazing. And then at the end of the video, there was some text in Tunic language. So I guess, yeah, the language must have been, extremely early then, because the message was written to me. And that was something that I had not seen before. I was like, what? How do you even read this? Because anything that I had seen before, I had written myself, and I knew what it said. So I needed to, like, I don't know, run upstairs and get my like decoder ring basically, and come back and be like, what are they actually telling me? And it was them saying like, hey, this is a cool game. Yeah, let's work on it. Audio treatment by Power Up Audio. And at that point, I was like, well, I can't say no now. This is too perfect.
Right. Yeah, they knew what they were doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he's mentioned on stream before that the build was like enormous. Like, I think you were like downplaying it in some interview, and he was like, no, it was like 10 hours of content or something. Like it was like, I mean, what even was that? Like, is that the state the game was in, or was it just, you know, do you have any idea what that build would have been like?
I think it might have been the people call it the dev world, like that prototype, that zone, which has some commonality with the end game, but lots and lots of different stuff. Which it was just sort of a different, it was one contiguous area. It had, you know, like shops, and I think you did collect some manual pages there. Maybe those existed at the time. Maybe they didn't. I don't actually remember if those are. We might have put the manual pages in the dev world as a treat for people in the finished product. But yeah, it's. I should see if I could dig up that video they put together.
And like, what does that feel like? I mean, does that kind of change your perspective on the project when you're like, okay, I have collaborators now. Like, I can't back out of this anymore, or like, you know, like, did it feel momentous like that, or was this just like, yeah, this is what has to happen to move forward?
Yeah, both, I guess. It's it is something that, you know, it's like, oh, okay, we've crossed this bridge because we needed to cross this bridge, but it still feels like entering a new era, where now it's this happened a number of times during development, whether it's we're making a trailer asset, or we're going to be hiring someone, or we're looking for an illustrator. All of those things are big, like, but I'm giving up some amount of control, which I think is something that I've gotten better at, because one of the reasons that I ended up started working on this project, which is, oh, everything takes so long. There's so many people involved. I know, I'll just go into game jam mode and bang something out, because I seem to be able to do that really fast when I'm doing it by myself. And not only is doing something by yourself not more time efficient, but there are lots of things that I at least simply could not do. So yeah, it was always a moment of anxiety, because most moments are filled with anxiety when making a video game, at least for me. But I'm really, really happy with all of the collaborators that we ended up with.
I do want to talk about a couple more, because I think they're the ones more mysterious than most when it comes to like how this all came together. But I do have one question before we move on from audio. How in the world did you give feedback or like work back and forth with audio? Like, I imagine you getting like a music track and being like how do you go from that to be like, I have to tell this person who made this marvelous piece of, you know, music or asset, like, this is not what I'm looking for, or, or like, you know, I can't even imagine how you would go back and forth like that.
A lot of the early, with music in particular, Terrence and later Janice as well, would make tracks that didn't necessarily have a particular spot for them in mind, right? Just like, here's this strange ambience that I feel fits the vibe, and we could use that as a temp track or shuffle it around, and then later we'd say, oh wait, this area needs something, why don't you build off of this track that you worked on? And so there was never a I was not terribly prescriptive when it came to that sort of thing. I would give some sort of like, here's the vibe, here's oh, we're in a sewer, it's like this, here's some music that I'm into. That's sort of what we're going for. And generally speaking, I would just let them go wild and have the music part of the game be theirs, right? And not have me come in and control it too much, because I'm not a musician, right? I can't just be like more drums and
Right.
have that improve it necessarily. There was a little bit of back and forth about like intensity sometimes, like Terrence's music, the music that I'd listened to in particular, was this very like broad, airy, wondrous, ethereal, adjective sort of music. And when it came time to like boss fights, I was just listening to the hunter from Bloodborne, from the Father Gascoigne fight, on loop over and over again. I'm like, it's got to be, like white knuckle. And so there was a long time where we hadn't done any boss music yet, and I was really curious how that was going to turn out. And I think Terrence and Janice nailed it. There were some times where we're like, oh, there's sort of two sections where it like starts slow and then gets more intense. We need to make sure that the intensity comes a little bit earlier, because that's when the boss fight starts, blah, blah, blah. But that was one of the nice things about working with people who are incredibly good at what they do, is that they're incredibly good at what they do and they can roll with that. Also, Kevin is not... Power Up Audio did the sound effects for the game, but Kevin was also the audio director, and so he has a lot of musical training and was able to communicate with Terrence and Janice more technically about what needed to happen, especially when it came to like hiding secrets in the music and that sort of thing. So, yeah. Pro tip: work with world-class professionals.
Yeah. I think I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I think what stands out to me about the soundtrack is that it's like the world is so evocative visually of previous experiences that people may have had, but the music like cuts so hard against that. Like it feels so otherworldly compared to like contemporaries. So it was, at first I was like, this is so different, and then it's just become so special. So okay, so unsung heroes part, or I guess maybe they are sung and I just don't know about them, but Felix Kramer, credited as producer, I believe. I know basically nothing about them other than that, based on my research, they were pretty pivotal in kind of getting the core team rounded out. Can you fill me in? I don't have many notes.
So Felix is a multi-talented person who, among other things, knows the business side of indie game development and game development in general. And so they were the sort of person that saw the Secret Legend prototype and were like, cool, I need to scope this out. And were able to help shepherd me, idiot baby trying to make a video game. They were able to shepherd me into things like, oh, you should be talking to these people and let's work together to get this in front of the right folks. A good, I guess, producer is someone who's going to just like nudge things in the right direction. And I don't think this project would be where it is if it was not for Felix.
The other duo I guess I want to talk about is Adam and Rebecca. Mostly because from my point of view, it's very like direct, like no one, Felix, Adam and Rebecca, Finji. But I'm sure like in the moment it didn't actually kind of flow like that. How did that come together? And like, yeah,
it was that, but like spread out and blurred together a lot. Like, Felix does lots and lots of things, and they're working on other projects now, and we're still helping out with Tunic when it launched, but had handed off a lot of responsibility to Finji by the end. But they were the one who made sure that the game was in the right hands, and that was Adam and Rebecca Saltzman, because people sometimes ask like, oh, how did you get involved with Finji? And I needed to like spend a lot of time flipping through like notes and emails to find out like, when did this relationship actually start? Because it was actually quite early, just like, hey, I'm looking for a little bit of mentorship help. Here's this thing that I'm working on. I'm thinking about putting it in front of some potential investors. I know that you're involved with them. What do you think? Because the two of them are, I don't know, industry figureheads, like mentors. They're extremely generous with their time, especially for people who, like me, were just like, here's this goofy little project. I'm looking for some help. I at no point was I thinking like, oh, I'm going to be published by you or anything like that. But they helped and gave advice. And at a certain point, they were like, hey, yeah, we would totally publish your game. Absolutely. Like, I didn't know if the game needed a publisher at that point, but it was like, okay, that's good to know. Eventually it was like, yeah, this game needs a publisher. I can't do all of this by myself. And even with Felix's help, it made sense. Like, you know what? I don't have interest in like forming my own studio and negotiating with platform holders and dealing with licensing and merch and all of this stuff. Like, this is all stuff that sounds terrifying to me. And so it made a lot of sense to go with a publisher. And there was a little bit of a hunt there. Like, we talked to a few different folks and met some really cool people. But in the end, just like being able to work with your friends is a rare luxury. And at that point, I was friends with Finji. And so it made a lot of sense.
Was that like, when did you officially sign? I think I may have asked you this preliminarily, and I don't know if we knew exactly, but like, was that just kind of like, okay, yeah, I guess that happened, moving on, or was that a pretty big shift?
One of the many things that made working with Finji so good, makes working with them so good, is sitting down and doing design consultations. Like, we would do that once a week for years, is sit down and have, time with, say, Adam, talking about where the game was and what the plan was. And there was a moment when I sat down and said, like, we had like a big block of time carved out, and I just brain dumped the whole design into Adam. And at the end of that call, he was like able to ask meaningful questions and ask me about things and come up with good solutions to problems. And that was another one of those, like, wait a second, this is in your brain now too. I said it, and it, like, now that pattern exists inside your understanding as well. And that was sort of a revelatory moment for a number of reasons. One, it's like having another brain have those things and be able to communicate with you is just so much. It gives you so much power when it comes to like thinking about things. I don't know. That's a silly thing to say, but you know what I mean? Just like somebody else working on a problem means that you have at least twice as much brain power. But it also meant that I had a little bit more, what do you call it?
Like accountability or something? Or
that's exactly it. Accountability. You can't just cancel an entire idea. You can't just say, oh, actually, no, I've changed everything around. You need to have sober second thought and be like, okay, I'm going to have to explain this and rationalize it to someone and say, this is why I'm doing it. You can't just do it on a whim. That happened a few times along the way, with, explaining things to the other collaborators, but working with Finji in particular and Adam was helpful there.
Okay, I'm going to pick a date and time here. July 8th, 2016, you ship off to Sweden. Okay, so this I have only ever heard of this in one like little YouTube video, and so I guess this doesn't get talked about enough, but I am like just fascinated like how that this exists. I mean, I read up on it a little bit, and like I would just love to hear how you found out about this, like what it was like being there. And I guess it seems like you kind of shipped right off from this experience to your first big show.
Correct.
So we'll just bundle all that together and kind of work through that.
Yeah, I think I applied to the previous year's Stugan, which is the name of the program, and didn't get in. Fine, maybe I'll try again next year. And I think the following year, because wait, was it? Did you say 20? It was 2016, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think I applied in 2015, didn't get in. 2016 GDC rolls around, and I was talking to a friend, I think pre-Train Jam, a friend named Robin. And Robin had gone that previous year. And so I said, should I apply again? Was it actually really great? And Robin's German, but I won't do the German accent. He said, oh, absolutely. 100%. No question. You should do it. I'm like, oh, what was it? What was really great about it? Did you like get a lot done? Was it like super productive? It's like, no. It was the people that I met there. I was like, okay, cool. So I applied, and I got in. And so, yeah, that was definitely one of those, is this a stupid idea? Who knows? Let's go for it. Which makes it sound like I make stupid decisions all the time. No, it was, is this a stupid decision? Let's fret about it for months and months and months, and then finally do it and instantly feel like you've made a terrible mistake, blah, blah, blah. You know how it is, I'm sure. So I got in, went to Stugan, spent 7 weeks there, and it was incredible. And yeah, Robin was right. It was, so it's a ski lodge in the summer that is rented out by a bunch of sort of industry benefactors sponsoring the thing. And it is a little bit hard to describe, especially from a custom standpoint. They're like, are you working there? I'm like, well, yes. Well, who are you working for? Well, I'm working for myself, but they're paying you? No. They're just putting you up with room and board? Yes. So you go there, you have a place to stay. They provide food, and you work on your game. You hang out with folks, meet people from all around the world. Mentors come in. They do, events. It's sort of like going to summer camp, except most of your day is spent in an office, which is actually just the main lodge at the ski resort. And I had to bring an iMac there because I didn't have like a laptop or anything like that. So I had to ship a giant computer there. I was mortified that it was going to be smashed along the way. Anyway, it was a wonderful experience. I met a lot of very cool people there. I met my partner there, who I am with to this very day. And it was, yeah, looking back at it, it was sort of a weird, like what a ridiculous confluence of events that led to that. And I am supremely grateful, because it's, when you say it out loud, it is like, excuse me, what? Like someone's just gonna, as long as you can get to Sweden, they're gonna take you in and feed you and give you a bed and let you, lie under the stars and the Aurora Borealis and swim in this lake. It was, yeah, sort of a miraculous thing.
So I was looking over the attendees list, and it is wild to me how few of the other people or teams that were with you I've heard of since. I mean, like, just even at that point where they've reached a point where they could apply and be accepted to something like this, but then it's still so much of a risk or a gamble at that point. Yeah. Did it feel like the people around you and like yourself, this was still kind of a big gamble? I mean, did it feel like that, or was there so much confidence in that room that it was like, oh, all these people are going to be so much more successful than me, or something like that?
There were lots of different games at lots of different moments in development. Some were beautiful prototypes that were vying for multi-million-dollar investment, and that was their goal. Some people like me had a prototype that they were hoping to take to a show. Some groups were people that had made very popular games and were working on smaller projects themselves. Some of them were individuals who had incredible success on their first game and were now working on their next incredible success. So it really spanned the gamut. And nobody knows what's gonna meet their expectations and what won't. But we were all friends, and we were all trying to help one another as best we could.
So you finish this magical experience and you get on a plane, and PAX West is September 2nd.
Yeah, I think I went direct to PAX. And that's a good example of, like, for instance, the sort of thing that someone like Felix would do is make sure that happens properly, make sure that you've got a booth and that it's decorated and you've got Kigus to wear. And I think also I went to like XOXO right after that as well. It was a wild time for sure.
That seems like a pretty pivotal moment, like that show specifically. Talk to me about it. I guess any detail you remember about.
We had a corner spot at the Indie Mega booth, and we were well placed, and we had like a TV with a looping trailer that was running, and we let people come in and play the game, and we had decorated everything with like vines and had some beanbag chairs and stuff. And we didn't get too far into day one when we realized we were going to have to come up with a better system than just let people come in and play the game, because we were expecting like, oh, well, we'll let people try it out. Here's a prototype that has a bunch of content in it, explore for a bit, get a taste for what the game is. That's that. People would just sit down and try to exhaust this thing completely. And so we were like, okay, we need time slots and a ticketing system, and we had to hand out 15-minute time slots and like kick people off and like apologize profusely if press was coming in because we needed to get them in front of it anyway. And I remember someone looking at this this crowd that we had around us, and the mailing list signups that we were doing, and telling me, this was someone who had been in the industry for a while, and they were saying like, you're having a very good PAX, because I had no context, right? I had never even been to one of these shows before, any sort of video game, like proper sort of like fan focused conference. And so I had no idea what to expect. And so I needed someone to say like, no, things are going well for you. You should know that. Yeah, which was very good. We had some really excellent volunteers there as well. We were just full of enthusiasm and bouncing around in their own Kigus, sharing iPads with mailing list signups and stuff.
I can promise you, I derive immense joy from those interviews in the Kigus. It made me ask some questions, but it was fantastic. It stood out, I think, in the ways you want it to.
That was the main thing, was like, hey, we should do something goofy and cool to help this stand out a little bit. And I don't know, I can't regret it, because maybe that was one of the things that helped it be a good PAX.
This is the email that went out to the mailing list after PAX. My favorite part is, when is this coming out? Probably a year or so.
Yeah.
And this is 2016. Were you actually, on that train of thought at this point?
So it was near the end-ish of 2016. So I had spent like a year and a half, right? And I already had so much, right? I had this like whole thing, like we had the game figured out at this point. And a year is the maximum amount of time that anybody could need to do anything. So if you tack a year onto what you have already, and you really knuckle down and schedule it all out, you got this, right?
Yeah. And that's what happened.
Yeah, but maybe it'll slip, which is why it's a year or so. At the beginning of 2017 is when I started logging time spent. So I kept pretty careful track, minute by minute, of how I spent my time. So I could look back a day, a week, a month, a year, and see, why is this taking so long?
Did it feel like a mystery a little bit? Like that it was kind of so nebulous how you'd work on things that you're like, when I look back, I like legitimately do not understand why it's taking so long.
Yep. And that's why I ended up taking those notes. And now I can look back and be like, oh, I know exactly why it took that time. It's because I spent a lot of time trying to make this thing a finished product or like this particular area correct and good, when it was sort of floating above nothing. There was no fundamental sort of like beginning, middle, end structure that it was slotting into properly. And in retrospect, I don't know if I could have come up with a better workflow. If that would have worked better or not, but I think that's why, like this giant tower ends up not really having a place in the final game design for whatever reason.
I feel like this email goes out like this is a different project now, right? Like, I mean, was it so gradual that you didn't really feel like, okay, I'm at a different stage moving into 2017? Or did it feel like, okay, wow, I have musician, audio director, producer, like a mailing list. I've been to a show. I have intense interest. Like,
yeah, it is sort of a slow series of, oh boy, this is a real thing now, isn't it? So yeah, I wish I had like particular moments where the realization of things are really moving along now, aren't they? But a lot of the time, it's just everything was always the next terrifying step.
I imagine at this point, you're still kind of working alone, right? Like you're not in a studio with these people, even if you do have collaborators, and it was pretty much a distributed development kind of cycle. How are you maintaining personal health?
I think keeping a time log actually helped a great deal because it would allow me to look at a day's worth of work and say, you know what, that's good. And a piece of advice that I took to heart or tried to take to heart and will sometimes give is that discipline is more valuable than motivation, if that makes sense. Motivation is not something we have a lot of control over, but discipline is about having control over when and how you get something done, even when you're not feeling motivated. So getting into a daily routine really helped. And it also meant that I could see that it's okay to feel like shit today and get nothing done. Maybe that just happens. And that's okay. Maybe you had one of those last week. Maybe you had one the week before that too. But it's not the norm. You are getting some stuff done. So that was valuable for a number of reasons. And I often talk about how it was valuable for like knowing where to spend effort and how much time you were spending on things, but it was also just a nice routine. And I ended up building a little timer, which is this horrifying looking contraption, which was the minimum device I could think of, which is just I press a button and it says 0 and it goes up by a minute every minute. And it makes a little beep every 25 minutes to remind me that it's still on. And I improved it over the years so it'll like chirp if it's low on battery, which is a nice little thing. But the reason for this is that so often it would be like, I've got, a browser window open with a timer on it, and then my computer crashes. And I have no idea how long I've been working now. So just having this like physical, discrete object that I can sit on my desk was super valuable. It was a fun little electronics project, distraction as well. So yeah, mental health wasn't great in a lot of ways, a lot of like brooding, but time management helped, I think. And having collaborators to talk to every once in a while and be able to just I don't know, unload some development anxieties and be like, this is what I'm concerned about. And saying it out loud sometimes makes you realize you shouldn't be that worried about it. It's going to be fine.
I mean, at this point, does it feel like you were, for the most part, maintaining a pretty sustainable pace? Or was that still kind of a concern?
I spent a lot of time like being worried, that's for sure. Thinking, oh my God, I'm the one boss fight I thought I had is not really good enough. It needs to be scrapped. And I would like to have, 3 or 4 or 5 or more of these in the game. So I'm at 0 of those and I want this many. Let me do the math, divide by 0. I'm never finishing, right? That was the anxiety. That was the stare at the ceiling at the middle of the night and just think, what a tremendous mess I have made. So that was, like constant eroding of my psyche. But I wasn't burning it. I think I'm somewhat resilient to short-term burnout, maybe, in that I was able to sit down, work for a certain amount of time, get stuff done, and give myself the leeway to have an off day every once in a while if that was okay. Whether or not that pace and that worry over such a long period of time has done irreparable harm in a more subtle way remains to be seen.
So, yeah, I think it was late 2017 you started doing like a YouTube series. And there were like 5 episodes of that, and then they mysteriously vanished. And the YouTube channel has not been updated in like 3 years, but maybe 4. But what spurred that on?
The project was funded by a group called Indie Fund. They contributed to sort of, I had an early prototype, and they were like, "This looks good. Here, we are investing in it." And part of what I would do is I would let them know every once in a while, "Here's what I'm working on. Here's progress. Here's how the game looks. Here are the shows that I'm taking it to. Here's a short little video, a couple of minutes long." And somebody said, "Hey, you should make these for the public." And I thought, okay, yeah, cool, great. Let me do exactly that. They ended up being not super time consuming. They would take like a day or 2 to make. But it always had to be at a point where there was like content to put into it. Like there's a bunch of time beforehand of like, oh, what's worth showing? What can I show? What looks good enough? And what is not too spoilery or whatever. And I think maybe it was post the 2018 reveal at like the name change, or no, name change happened before that. It must have been 2017.
I think when you started doing the videos, it had already happened.
It must have been then the point after the 2018 sort of like Microsoft press conference sort of thing. It's like, we kind of really heads down, finish this video game. Like, give yourself the leeway to just get it done and not worry about doing these promotional things at this point. It would have been cool, maybe even just internally, to have little note to self updates on how things were going. But I imagine it would have been a lot of,
One of the early videos you did on YouTube was kind of grayboxing the, I think it was the Forest Fortress. And like, that was a long time before launch, like 6 years, or no, 5 years. Yeah. And well, 4.5. And it is like pretty much exactly what shipped. Like, is that like the remarkable exception, or did you kind of have that flow down at that point?
I guess that is a thing that I have observed before, is looking back at stuff, you think it went from didn't exist to kind of existed to pretty much existed to done. And so you expect halfway through that it's like, oh, it probably kind of sort of exists here, but not really. More realistically, it goes from doesn't exist to exist in a form and stays that way for a long time because you're working on other stuff. And then at some point you need to go back and say, all of this needs to get rearranged and reworked and rebuilt. and stuff needs to get rearranged. So it's always surprising to look back and see like, hey, wait, no, this same layout, for instance, has been sticking around for a long time. You end up with it's not like a linear timeline of like I made this one first and I made this one last and then we shipped. It ends up being like you quickly build all of these things and they become your friends and then your enemies and then your loathsome rivals as you're trying to wrangle them together and have them all work together. So I guess what we were seeing there was some point in the middle there where they existed but hadn't had that final layer of polish added, perhaps.
Yeah, I think I may be recalling this wrong, but they were like the frogs were there at one point.
That probably was this area is done and these enemies are done. And even though we know that these enemies won't be in this area, we're going to put them there because we just want to show what action looks like.
I think, yeah, the name change happens around E3 2017 because I think it got showed off in the PC gaming show. Is there like an interesting story there? Or was it like, nope, this just is less generic?
It was a long, really painful process to get the name change because in my heart of hearts, the game was Secret Legend. And I kind of like, I knew it couldn't be that, but I always wished that it could be. But it was, super generic. That was the thing that we found was people would walk away from that PAX demo and be like, it's the Fox game, Legend something Fox game. And there's an enormous like shared Google Doc with piles and piles and piles of names that I think one of the challenges was that we wanted to evoke this sort of like, cool fantasy feeling, but it's really easy for a title to look like a Dragonlance novel title. Do you know what I mean? Like really kind of cheesy and in genre. And that didn't make sense. And I had written down a name that included the word tunic. It was like tunic and something else. And maybe it was either Adam or Felix in that shared doc, like maybe just highlighted and was like, maybe just this. And we ended up settling on that in the way that we knew that we would, which is you find something that A, nobody really hates, and B, you can get the SEO for. Like you can get your domain name and the like Twitter handle or whatever. Like if you can get those and nobody really hates it, then you've probably got something that's decent. And that's where we ended it. It was definitely one of those like, well, we got to choose something. Okay, this, right? But it was a long deliberation process because we had known for ages that it would have to change, right? Like it was like we really got to do something about that name, huh? For like a year, and then made the Google Doc called Secret Legend is a bad name, and I might still have that actually. Secret Legend, Triangle Quest, To Go Alone, The Legend Tells of Seven Bells. A lot of these are really awful, really, really awful. Tiny Prophecy.
I love that's okay. I can see that.
Oh, it was like bound in capital letters. Like I had written that one down. And I was like, jumping, traveling, books are bound. Shame it's taken. Because there's a game that's about like dancing or something like that called Bound. It's like really cool looking. That came out a number of years ago. It's Tunic, Tuft, Tunic and Tuft. And then Adam has a note that says, dang, this is actually maybe okay. What? It's pretty rough to read this because it's Fez 2, Phil says it's okay. Phil says it's okay because Felix also runs Polytron, which is
really
that's
okay.
But actually, this is interesting. There's a screenshot at the top of sort of requirements for it. So emotional profile, mystery and adventure, bullet point. Lonely ruins, bullet point. Mystery / wonder of the unknown. Wide cryptic world, hostile and indifferent, but ready for exploration. An impossible task, so big and far away. An old civilization hiding layers of discovery behind an otherwise complete experience. These are all, references. Adventuresome questabout was a phrase that I had used a bunch to describe the game. And I don't think that ever made it into the title list, but that sort of feeling was part of it.
Let's fast forward a year then. So from E3 to E3, now it's a bigger deal, right? Now you've signed something with Microsoft, which I won't ask you about. But this is the stage show, right? This is like the trailer that has its own score, and you did a whole dev doc on and everything. Like, take me there for a minute.
That was how before I said there are some moments where I'm like, wow, what the heck am I doing? That was one of them. I remember sitting in like an airplane, I think landing at LAX, being like, oh, this is really happening, huh? And I think maybe the fact that a lot of this happened over such a long period of time means that it's sometimes hard to appreciate those moments. And that was one of those like, wait, feel like you just woke up from a dream. Like, wait, where am I now? Oh God. And that was very, very weird and very cool. So we didn't know when during the show the trailer was going to run. We're all sitting there sort of in the back. And every time the screen went black, it was like, oh God, this is it, huh? And it wasn't until suddenly it was. And that was the gripping at the heart. Mm-hmm. Oh God, take a quick picture for this moment. And it was surreal. It was weird. And I didn't know at the time that Phil Spencer was going to come out right afterwards and name drop my hometown and use Tunic as an example of what I guess sort of like the theme of Microsoft's show was, which was, hey, we've got, Forza, and we've got this weird little game with a fox, here's the breadth of gaming today. And that was surreal. And then I needed to immediately leave because we needed to get ready for our behind closed doors meetings with press that we're going to be going through. And so that was very cool. And again, one of those moments of like, how unlikely is this? I'm very grateful for the fact that happened, because that was, we had our own air-conditioned room with press coming in, talking to us, checking out the stuff that we had. And all the time, I'm feeling like I'm just this little guy, So, yeah, it's very special, and I feel supremely lucky.
I'm going to read you a quote. People will often say, I could have made a game in a tiny fraction of time. And well, yes, you've already seen the end product. And once you know that, it can be a fun challenge to implement. But really, it's second guessing yourself, revisiting things and changing stuff that will really make something take a long time, which I think we've kind of established at this point. But specifically, if we want to dive in, what has just been absolutely rebuilt to death? Or were there areas of the game around this stage when you're really digging in, that were just like, this sucks, we got to get rid of this, or
most things. So every area of the game, I'm pretty sure, has seen a few different versions. In my head, I usually have this is the finished version, and this is the old broken version that I needed to redo. But there's usually even a version before that I've forgotten about. And so it takes a little bit of pouring through old notes or whatever to remember, oh wow, dang, this is what this area used to be. But I'm trying to think. I don't think there's any area that didn't have that done, or really any mechanic that didn't have that done. One of the few things that survived from almost the very beginning to the end is the grass, like the way that the grass moves, was probably put together in a day in the first week of development and did not change. Maybe it was optimized a little bit at some point. But most things like, the sewer area, the sort of flooded well, how it connects to the overworld, the order that you do things, where it fits into the flow of the game, all of that just had so many different versions. The atoll being many different things at many different times, used to be like a beach with a lighthouse in the middle, and then that lighthouse became like an elder tech sort of monument that you went inside and you raised from the ocean floor by doing something else. And there were caves that you went into, and the camera did this thing where it stayed in the middle and orbited around, and you could go clockwise, but you couldn't really go counterclockwise. And all of these things have a little bit that ended up making it into the end product, but most of the time it was just like ripped up entirely. Like a little bit of the design like philosophy or idea persisted, but generally speaking, all the like mesh assets were entirely recreated. Same thing with the overworld, many different versions of the overworld. And eventually the flow that I got into was be messy, be vague, don't put time into the sketch. I mean, put time into it, but realize that it's just a sketch and it's probably going to have to be reworked. Don't worry about getting this geometry just right. Don't worry about hidden back faces. Just throw in some cubes to see how it works. And then as time goes on and you sort of the design anneals into something that feels correct, then you can go in and start doing polish and adding blades of grass and stuff like that.
Yeah, I imagine that was tough because it sounds like that's your favorite part to some degree.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason that we brought on somebody to help with that. Ended up being Eric Billingsley, who's a multi-talented person. I needed to stop placing blades of grass, and the workflow that Eric and I ended up on, just getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, was I would gray box an area and test it and make sure it felt good and the flow through the level was correct. And then I would take one small section of it, or like even an uninvented, non-existent section, and decorate it to heck. I would build all the assets, like all the design building blocks, the archways and door frames and props and carpets and all those bits and pieces. And I would build like a little corner of the level that was decorated sort of the way that I envisioned it. And I would take those things and Eric would internalize that and make the rest of the level beautiful. And then he'd hand it back to me and I'd work on it and then I'd hand it back to him. It was really good. And we also had like an annotation system, which I think was one of the probably most useful pieces of tech that I built, which is just a way to add a node to a scene and type and have that appear as floating text both in the editor and in the game view if you wanted, so that it could be like, administrator corpses here, fountain here. And that was a good sort of note to self and a good way for us to communicate back and forth.
I don't actually know who mentioned this. It may have been Kevin, but it said there was like a desert level, but it was like super not fun, or like traversal through it was not fun and it got scrapped. Does that ring a bell?
Oh yeah. There was an area between the overworld and the quarry that was meant to be like sort of a desert area that had a number of versions. There was one that was this big broad expanse. There was one where there was like a sort of a town in it, like a ruined sort of, you can see the foundations of buildings sort of thing. There was one that was on a sort of a mesa style tiered thing with sort of a cliff face that you were exploring. And then that was entirely scrapped and it was turned into an entirely different area that was more forest based, that had its own enemies in there. And that was an area that Eric decorated as sort of like his first sort of like, hey, is it Here's a sort of a test to see if we work well together. And so we were sorry to see it go, but it didn't feel right. It was going to be a lot of work to get it good. And even the bones of it were like kind of interesting and cool, and it looked neat, but pacing wise and design wise, it just wasn't in the cards.
You mentioned that eventually you don't get the appeal anymore at some point in development. How did that feel like, kind of marching toward the end now?
I don't get the appeal of the game.
Yeah, I suppose that's what you're referring to.
Yeah. Yeah. It was pretty early on that I realized, wait a second. If you try to make a game that's full of secrets and you try to evoke this feeling of mystery and not knowing, it's really hard when you know all the secrets. Inherently, you need to know top to bottom every single thing. And that was a problem, and it took me a while to like fully wrap my head around what that meant. And what I was left with was, it felt like the world was like bled of wonder, right? I could see all the things and couldn't see it with the fresh eyes that people would eventually play it with. And looking at your playthrough actually made me realize how much stuff there was in the game. Because I remember looking at it and realizing like, oh, you've got the 3 things, and you're going to go to nighttime, you're collecting all the stuff, and then you're going to go to the end. And then I was looking at the timeline at the bottom. I was like, oh, there's still a fair bit of video left. Oh, right. There's all the rest of the stuff.
Right.
There's like game, the secret stuff. Yeah. And then you go and you do a bunch of secret stuff. I'm like, okay, that's right. No, wait, there's all these other things as well. And you edited it quite heavily to keep it concise. And it made me realize like, oh yeah, there are like a lot of layers here. It has that thing that we were going for with the very start, which is you're playing a game and then you realize you can peel it back and be like, oh, there's a bunch of secrets hidden here. And underneath that, there's another layer of secrets. And underneath that, there's another layer of secrets. It's not just that there's lots of secrets, but there's sort of like, it always feels like there's just a little bit more that you don't understand. And that was the thing that, this notebook, that's the thing that this thing was trying to communicate. And so by, I don't know, constantly feeling like there weren't any secrets in the game, and so I needed to add just one more layer, I think that's probably part of the reason we ended up with the game that we got, was being, I don't know, feeling like it's not there. There's no secrets in this game.
Yeah, like overcompensating for a problem you didn't actually have. Yeah,
exactly.
Let's jump forward 3 months before launch. Like, we're in 2022. The Game Awards unveiled your release date, and I remember that being like the moment I was kind of like exhaled, like, oh, okay, I can officially look forward to this game now, like, because it had just been dark for so long, right? And of course, I mean, we're skipping over COVID, and I'm sure that had a huge impact on development and the world, right? So I'm not discounting that, but what was that like? What was the day-to-day for those, 60 days, or I guess 60, 70 days leading up to launch?
I'm going to wind it back a little bit, because we, in June was when we said, this is when we need stuff locked down, right? It's not quite content lock fully, but like the game needs to be playable front to back. All the things that you want to be in there need to be in there. And then it was sort of like, we got to make a trailer. We got to do this, that, and the other thing. We outsourced for the trailer, which is a good idea. because it meant that there was a lot less sort of just like raw production work, capture and editing and stuff that needed to happen, because all the other trailers I had just done myself. And then that period up to up to the end of the year, and then in January as well, it was making the manual. The manual existed part of the design since pretty early, but exactly how the layout would work and what information was on which page was constantly changing. So much so that the document describing its layout was very, very messy, intentionally so. Like just full of sort of I've described it as like red string post-it notes, sort of like sort of thing, with ideas sort of splattered all over it in this really illogical way. But it was a useful document. It was, the fact that it was messy meant that it was in flux constantly, and I wasn't too precious about keeping it nice and tidy. And over the years, it like got more and more complex, and then slowly started to sort of crystallize into an exact layout. And I knew that I couldn't work on the pages during that time because they would just change, right? I had built prototypes. I knew sort of maybe what I wanted it to look like. And I just had it in my head that, and then I will spend these months just making the book, just nose to the grindstone, day after day, doing this thing. And thinking back on it, that was a bit of a risk. Like, it ended up working out basically as well as I had hoped, because, I'm very comfortable in Photoshop, and doing that sort of layout is something that I find like rewarding, and it was very cool to have it all come together. But to go to do like content complete, we've got a launch date in mind, we're working on a trailer, and like the core conceit of the game is still just a bunch of blank pages that say, here's where you learned about this mechanic. So it was an intense time for sure. But I don't know, it was sort of cathartic also, because it represented a capstone on this thing that I had no idea if it was going to be good or not. I just kind of wanted it to be done, and this was a representation of that completion. This one big Herculean task of doing the layout for this whole book just being like something that you grind through, and then it's going to be over, and then you can move on with your life.
Yeah, I imagine putting the illustrations like that you got from the artists and everything in there was probably pretty satisfying too. Like just seeing it come together, like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had been putting off for a long time making a halftone shader to do the sort of like printed look, because I was sort of like, I don't know, looking forward to it, and it was going to be a little bit complicated, so I shouldn't do it right now, but I need to do it at some point. And I think I mentioned it offhand, and Eric was like, I'm doing it. Like he also knew how fun it was going to be, and he took it, and I'm glad he did, because Eric did a phenomenal job on the halftone shader. It's really, really good. It was a harrowing time for sure, but I have fond memories of that period, because it was steady progress. Like, that's not normally something that you see in, or I saw in the video game. Like, anything that I made, it was like, how long is this going to last before I get fed up with it and have to remake it? But they're, the manual pages were very much like, this one is 80% done. It just needs this. This one is 100% done. I can move on. It was a good last mile, I think.
So I assume there's like press tour and like logistics when you get closer to launch. Like, I know we think of 3/16 as like the day it came out, but I'm sure you were kind of in that mindset well before that, right? Like, I get the impression there's like logistics of like, okay, we have to get these game codes out, which means people are going to actually get this in their hands well before this date, and I'm going to get feedback well before this date, and then I have to do interviews and like start that whole kind of cycle. Like, was that stressful?
Thankfully, that was handled mostly by Finji and their community management team. I think Harris Foster headed up the Discord that was set up for press, which was a good idea and a cool thing. And that was before launch. We had a little environment that everybody who was playing the game could hang out in and share ideas and have the experience that we thought would be sort of an important core part of what Tunic was, which is having people who are also playing the game and being able to exchange ideas and things. And some people really latched onto that and engaged with that. And I think a lot of people just sat back and watched, which is normal. That's how it happens in normal life as well, not sort of contrived press environments. And I was intentionally left out of that loop because for a number of reasons. One, it would be weird for the developer to be looking over the shoulders of the people playing the game, especially when it's a game about feeling like the developer's not looking over your shoulder a lot of the time. And so just having like a very small contact point with basically the community management / social media team and the press made a lot of sense. And also, so I wasn't just a bundle of nerves watching this thing constantly. It ended up being good in the end. And as an aside, we found I guess you'd call it a bug that we fixed before release, which was that the no fail mode would allow you to miss the entire like third act of the game, because you would go into the air fight for the first time and be like, I'm invincible. Okay, cool. Game's over. And it was someone in the press Discord, I never saw it, saying basically, what's everyone else talking about? Like, it was okay. And we were being like, wait, did you find the thing? We're like, no. And we realized, no, we got to change this. You can't, for a number of reasons, it's like the no fail mode needs to be turned off for this. So you perish appropriately in this fight, because anybody who's playing the game with no fail mode on is probably not interested in the combat and is more interested in the other parts of the game, like the exploration and the puzzle solving and stuff like that. And so to lock them out of the sort of the juiciest stuff in that category just seemed wrong. So that was a cool thing that we caught by doing this thing early.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like I've heard that was the trailer editor. Or like you were on a call with somebody and they were like, oh yeah, I put this trailer together and it was amazing and this game's great. And they're like, oh yeah, I noticed there was no footage from this time. And they're like, what are you talking about?
Oh yeah. I do remember that also. Yeah, that was, I guess we should have been primed for that. Like maybe we were aware of it and we are like, oh, we'll see how it shakes out. Like, oh, it sort of makes sense that if you turn this feature on, maybe it makes the last act feel more exclusive or something. But the moment we realized, oh no, it locks people out of this thing. And there's the chance that people are just going to be shitty on the internet by being like, oh, you clearly just played yourself by revealing that you were on easy mode this whole time, and people would be jerks about it. So we were like, no, we gotta make it work this way.
It seemed to review well. It seemed to do really well. I hope it did well for you. I won't ask you about like numbers and such, but I guess two questions is like, one, when you kind of were experiencing the public getting their hands on it for the first time, were there any standout moments where you're like, I cannot believe we missed this, or like, I cannot believe people are doing this? Yeah, I guess I'll start with that.
I'm trying to think of oh no, we missed this. Like there are some bugs that we realized early on, like, oh, you can interact with this MacGuffin that's not supposed to be there, because there's some like super rare null reference exception. If you're standing in just this right spot, you can pick up the green hexagon when it's not supposed to be there, or something weird like that we were like, oh, we need to fix this. But on the whole, bug-wise, the launch was surprisingly smooth. And I don't have much to compare it against. Like my previous life shipping games, where the experience was very different. But Finji and their QA team have plenty of experience shipping games, and their takeaway was, this is weirdly fine. No major problems. So I count myself very, very lucky there. I seem to recall vaguely there being some like, oh, shucks, we need to get a patch out ASAP. But, like, it's eating some people's save files. That super sucks and is one of the worst problems to have. But it's very rare. It's only happening to a few people, but a lot of people are playing the game, so it's a problem. if I could do it all again, and that's not exactly what your question was, but watching your video, um, I realized, hey, first of all, your game sense is very good. You picked up on a lot of stuff, which just means that, this game was basically made for you, I guess. I realized how many things there were there to find. Um, but I think also some of the combat is too hard.
Okay.
Uh, which is, I mean, there like I was most worried about the scavenger boss, honestly, which didn't seem to be a problem for you in your playthrough, at least. Yeah, the air fight I think was meant to be extremely hard, and I think the rationale behind that is this is meant to push against you as a player, so much so that you go out and maybe try to do something else. But knowing what I know now about how people play games, they're extremely persistent, and I probably would have toned that down somehow. It was a difficult thing to balance because you needed to be basically 100% sure that the player would fail the first time they go there, and that this is definitely a nail-biting fight that basically requires they have all of the hero relics, right? And in the end, it just ended up being too hard. Like the second phase got toned down a bit. Like I think it's got quite a few, like a lot less HP, but I think maybe just doing a little bit less damage, or having some of the hitboxes persist for less time. Like I feel like that was one of the things that I feel like could be tweaked a little bit. But in the end, that's why the no fail modes are there, to cover up for my failing as a game designer, I guess. But some people really like that stiff challenge, and that's okay. But it's always, I need to stop myself from second guessing too bad, because the QA team would tell me anytime I was like, I really want to like tone this down a little bit. Sometimes the QA team would be like, it's okay. It's supposed to be hard. We know it's hard. Don't compromise your vision because you saw one playtest go really bad. And so that was some good sober second thought on that stuff. So I don't want to question myself too much, but it can be really tough to watch a playtest basically and see a problem and not want to focus your entire intent on smoothing out that experience. The Siege Engine was you stumbled into basically the speedrun strat in your casual playthrough, which is get behind it, like get in there. And if I had seen that as a playtest before launch, that fight would probably be different, right? I probably would have been like, oh no, it's too hard. It's not telegraphed properly. What are you supposed to do? You could target these things that are stuck in a... And it probably would have changed a lot. And I guess the end product that we got was whatever particular cross-section of playtests that I watched turned into a finished product. We did tone down the scavenger boss quite a bit right before launch as well. Yeah. I forget what it was exactly, because I remember I had this like list of the things that it needed to be and like proposed solutions for how to deal with it. I think it was a behavioral change that we ended up making. So I wanted to make sure that it was still this white knuckle fight where the pressure was kept up, but I think maybe there's a thing where the scavenger boss will like let you get a little bit of distance sometimes, as opposed to just constantly being super aggressive. But anyway, yeah, it's
How quickly do you feel like it kind of flamed out? And I hate to phrase it like that, but I feel like I've gone through that a lot with creative projects. Like, I'll put 6 months of work into a video and I'll be like, okay, it's time for everyone to see my video. And a day later, it's like everyone has forgotten about my video, right? Like how did you handle that?
I feel like it's been fairly good in that I was able to ride the high for a while. And even now, I'll get people saying, hey, I just played this game and I really loved it. It was a really important experience for me. And that just is so wonderful. And so I don't think that feeling of like happiness for other people having this experience and pride for the thing that we made, I don't think that's ever going to go away. And the game is still like a big part of my life with like we announced the physical release with the manual and everything yesterday, and we've got some merch coming out and things like that. So it's still a thing that occupies a lot of my time. And every now and again, I'm reminded that it's like it's a cool thing, right? It's a neat thing that we made, and people enjoy it. And even though I can look at it and I can feel my brain rolling off of thinking about it because it represents just like a lot of fretting. It's comforting to know that the finished product is something that people enjoyed.
How bummed were you when you realized the Ice Beam was the wrong mana cost?
Well, the game was out, and people like had if it was pre-release, me realizing that made it into the final thing, yeah, it would have been like, oh no, 0 to 10 game, entirely broken. At that point, I had developed a little bit of an insulating barrier by being like, no, it's fine. The game did well. People like it as like a holistic product. It's okay. But it was like really sucks to have to change this. Not because it's like a bug, because like fixing bugs, that happens all the time. The big thing was that it might disappoint and annoy some people, which is why there's the cheeky little concession in there for the speedrunning community. So on behalf of the whole team, and especially from myself, to you as a representative of the speedrunning community, I'm sorry.
Apology accepted. When I reached out in May, was that like a foregone conclusion? I mean, because I know you've had speedrunning in mind, especially with Kevin on the team for a long time. Like, was that just like, well, here we go, like this is what we expected, or was it kind of like, oh wow, yeah, I guess this is gonna happen? I mean, I'm not even sure if I was the first one to reach out, but
we knew that speedrunning was, well, we hoped that speedrunning would be a thing that this game could do, or that people could do with this game. The fact that baked into its structure is this idea that you could get into places where you're not supposed to be and like take alternate routes that require previous knowledge. All of that was something that was in there from basically the very start. Like I mentioned, building these directed these graphs that represented requirements. I built those early on for Tunic. Like, okay, you got swords. Sword versus bush means that you can get past. Lantern versus dark means that you can get past. But I ended up having this markup where it was like, oh, there's some dotted lines that represent, but you can do this alternate route if you have this thing instead. And it was very clear that this technique was not going to work, because the whole idea was that everything could have an alternate solution, and it wasn't going to be a clean, tidy thing. You know, it was good. The idea was, yeah, you should be able to get to this area as the first thing you do. Somehow, you know, slip through these paths, you know, get a secret item that lets you bypass these things. And so we knew that it was going to be at least the sort of game in theory that would be speedrunnable. So that's why there's things like the speedrunner's sword scrolled away and stuff like that. But I had no idea if it would actually work. Like I spent plenty of time working on the game while, you know, like whatever GDQ was on in the background, and thinking to myself, oh, wouldn't it be neat if we added this cool little thing? But in the end, all of the weird and wild stuff that you and the community have found and exploited, I mean, a lot of it we didn't know about, you know, like right. The effigy stuff, like some things we did know, like, oh, you can clip through this wall. You know, Kevin was very good at doing all kinds of super weird stuff. You know, falling off of ladders and quitting to title while you're falling and you've hit a loading zone. Oh, we should make sure that you could do this to skip the autoscroller. Like, this is all stuff that Kevin knew about and informed us of, and I was able to add. But then there's stuff like ladder storage and effigy skip and stuff like that. Like there was a while where there was a very like frame specific cadence of dashing that would allow you to gain the tiniest fraction of lateral displacement every time you did it. Like you would dash off of an edge and you would snap back, but you would have made like a millimeter's worth of progress. And if you dashed again at just the right time, it wouldn't reset. So you could accumulate this little bit of distance that would allow you to cross a gap arbitrarily. And you could use that to get all of the hero relics at once, basically. And there was a while where we were like, we should understand this bug sufficiently that we can control it and make sure that it's in there explicitly. And I think the dash ended up being such a bear to get like debugged properly that got sort of like smoothed over at some point. But we were thinking about it for sure. As for whether or not, I think you were the first person to like approach more formally and say like, hey, speedrunning community, we'd like you to become involved in this. But I had seen your stuff before, because of course I'm going to be narcissistically scrolling through who's playing this game on Twitch. And I saw your avatar there. And so I was like, oh yeah, you.
That's awesome. Was it a good experience? I mean, was it what you'd hoped it would be to like sit in on a run or commentate?
It's always a little bit weird to be like, hello, it's me, person who made the video game, here in your chat. You're just going to have to take my word for it. So it was, and of course, I mean, I think through you, the GDQ commentary like eventually manifested. Like if it wasn't for your involvement, I don't think that would have happened, because it was with, was it Sunny Muffin, and so that was sort of a little dream come true to be able to participate in GDQ somehow. So it was, I think every part of that slice of the experience has been a delight.
So I'm going to do a lightning round. Is it all caps Tunic or just title case?
It's all caps Tunic officially, but sometimes I feel embarrassed about that, and we'll do lowercase Tunic so it doesn't seem like I'm like following the brand TM. But officially, It's Tunic. On Twitch, I think it's lowercase, and we couldn't get them to change it. But, oh well.
Is it weird when people say your voice is great?
I mean, I'll take it as a compliment, right?
Okay.
I think it maybe goes to my head a little bit, and probably contributes to me being quiet when I'm doing proper public speaking. But yeah, I'll take it.
If Tunic had a Lego set, what would it be?
Oh wow. I think like one of those little self-contained island things, you know, like it's some ruins and stuff like that. Like it's got to be the overworld, right? And like a little slorm, like a single, like a 1x1 or a 2x2 slorm that sockets on there.
Was it your intent to make you feel guilt fighting basically every overworld enemy in this game?
Maybe a little bit. Like blobs, yeah, they're just little idiot first enemies. You're supposed to feel like a monster. The little bouncy hedgehog ones are supposed to be a little bit scarier, but they've got those big eyes. The licky bats,
The friends. Yes.
Friends officially, just because it makes it really weird to talk about. I think those are actually like pretty scary. They're not that cute, but I don't know. My partner has an extremely good eye for what is cute, and I definitely made some things that I'm like, oh, what if this is an overworld enemy? And she's just like, no, that's not cute. It's gotta be cute. So I think there's a certain roundness to even the scary enemies in the game.
How sick of Memories are you?
I didn't name any of the tracks. That was all Terrence
Okay.
and Janice. I do not know which one Memory of Memories is. Which one is
That's
Memory of Memories?
amazing. The overworld theme.
It's so weird because in my head, when I hear the overworld, it is the Double Fine documentary one. Like ba 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 da da. Like that's the one that sticks in my head. I'm gonna give you live react. You know, I'm importing this FLAC file right now, and I'm gonna play it, and I'm gonna tell you what I think. Okay, here we go. No, it's beautiful. It's fucking great. Are you kidding me? That was one of the nice things about not really touching the music, is that I get to hear it as an audience member, and I don't know the inner workings of music or key or arpeggiation and stuff like that. I can just hear it as this beautiful thing. Also, it's a FLAC, so it's like the best you can hear it. By the soundtrack now, yeah.
Where is the Librarian's Butler robot from?
Like lore-wise, or like where did it come from?
I don't know. You tell me.
I think originally the reveal order was going to be different, that you will have encountered those beforehand. And then when you see this, you're like, oh no, it's been like repurposed into this coffee table or something like that. But I think the way that the game goes now is you have only seen derelict, like busted up ones in the frog cave, Frog's Domain. And maybe haven't put two and two together that these are supposed to be similar things. But yeah, it was definitely meant to be a little bit of a like, oh wait, what is this a bad thing? No, it's sort of this weird thing that I haven't seen before. This like weird piece of civility in a world that seems to be in ruin.
I assume this is true, but the purgatory save, that you can like use to warp to the dev world, was that how like accidental / intentional was that?
I remember at Stugan, I was talking to some people, and we were talking about the feeling of uncovering a old save, like seeing that there's somebody else who rented the same cartridge had this save file that like cleared the game. And I remember them being like, I pitched the idea like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if, I think this might be a neat idea. They were like, oh, you gotta, like, you have to, like, it's got to be built around this idea. And so for a long time I thought, maybe I shouldn't, maybe unless I could do this idea justice, am I really going to be able to do that? And the golden path that sort of like slotted in, like a lot of development and fretting about it was trying to take all these disparate ideas that just existed as moments, like, wouldn't it be cool if, and actually slotting them into a progression. And so the golden path had a slot for this sort of thing, and it made its way in there and ended up being pretty neat. I think sort of like the one outlier. I think it's the only one that you won't be able to get from just the book, if that makes sense. And I think it was Terrence or Kevin, or both, who came to me one day and said, you can die here. You know that, right? And I was like, oh yeah, of course. Yeah, I guess what happens? I was like, oh, it just breaks because there's no set position. We should do this, 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 this. And there was all these ideas, like somebody suggested, well, maybe I won't say, of some things that you would do that were like really elaborate and scary. And we settled on like, who is going to be doing this? Who's going to be finding this? It's going to be people who are observant and dedicated and probably have turned this game inside out. And so what better thing to show them but like a very early version of what it would have been like. And it took a surprising amount of work, of not even work, but just like wrangling to get that to exist in the game, because so much of it is broken. So much of the tech that existed there and the models and shaders and stuff were just, it's a sort of a hollowed out version of what that space was, with as much of it as I could get working. Like there's enemies that just stand stock still and things like that. But anyway, that's a long-winded answer to the question.
Did you have a shape in mind for like the speedrunner code?
Oh, right. What is it called? The C code?
Yes. It can't be a C. Can you at least tell me that was not what you had in your mind?
I don't think so. I'm trying to think if I had I think I might have written the blurb first and then checked to see maybe what it looked like. The blurb being a small piece of text that unfortunately was found or discovered well after the code had been ripped violently from the code base. Well, it was that allowed us to, I'm going to speak candidly about some things, well, semi-candidly, about some of the secrets that we've hidden in the game, like maybe with some recent merchandise that maybe is visible in one of our views. There were codes there that needed to be like pretty hidden. Like that code existed in the console version of the game for a long time because we knew that people probably weren't decompiling Xbox builds or anything like that. But we knew that someone out there had the ability to take a look at things under the hood. And so that's why the PC patch came out basically the day that people were starting to receive the merch.
You've mentioned Myst. Have you played it? Have you finished it?
The first Myst that I properly played was Real Myst, I think, and I got as far as Rhyme, and I think stopped. Like there were some puzzles in Rhyme, something to do with like syringes, or was it decanting puzzle or something that I was just like, I have no idea. And I stopped at that point, but I think it had been out for a while. I don't think I was playing it at the time. And I think I've played a bit of Riven and a bit of Myst 3 as well. I can't remember if this is me absorbing somebody else's experience, but I think I found the garden path in Riven, or one of them. There's like, garden path is the term that we used for in Tunic, the paths where you're like, wait a second, I could have gone here the whole time, which is not really what garden path means, but it's the little sort of secret path in behind it. And I think there's one of those in Riven where you like press a particular button on a statue or something. And I feel like maybe I bumbled into that backwards, which was a cool moment. Anyway, next question.
Have you finished Elden Ring?
Spoilers for Elden Ring. I am at a few fronts right now. I'm at, I think it's Margit up by the tree. So like I went in and I aced whatever boss is just outside there. The like Godfried, God win maybe. Took it out one try. Felt very good about myself. And then went up to and died to, I think, Margit, and then stopped and was like, oh, okay, this seems possible, but I'm going to come back later. And now I'm exploring the sewers, and my bloodstain is in some obscure corner of drainage pipes, and it's been there for days or weeks, and I haven't gone back to it. So I need to at some point to go retrieve those and carry on that, I don't know, slug killing adventure down there. I know you didn't. Yeah, where are you? You finished it, huh?
Listen, I know it's not really fair to say like I think Tunic was better than Elden Ring because we're talking about like a Hamlet versus like a Metropolis kind of comparison, but I think the problems with Elden Ring are more effectual because the game is 100 hours long. So
it does go on, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yes.
And I part of me loves that. They're just not the fact that there's always more content for me to enjoy, but I kind of wish I had known from the start how long it was, because that feeling of having the map continually zoom out is always wonderful. But I wonder also what the experience would have been like to start at the beginning and have that giant blank space and just be filled with that feeling of having this enormous world full of things to discover. I don't know.
Let's look back now that the game is content complete, which like asterisk, I know, but like assume it's content complete. What do you think you really nailed, and what do you think you were like, man, I really just should have reworked this?
It's maybe obvious, but in the end, I think the manual as like a design conceit worked really well. It's the thing that people mention when they talk about the game. Like that everything is built around this sort of, puzzle book. And I knew that it was an important part of the game, but I didn't realize so much that it would capture people in the way that it did. And so I'm very proud of that. And just as an artifact of like, you know, layout and stuff like that, like I think it's cool, and I'm proud of how it turned out. And like I mentioned before, I would tweak some HP values in some of the bosses. I feel like one of the criticisms of the game was, you know, how the combat played out. And I think in the places where the combat isn't a problem, it's because it isn't especially hard. So I don't think it's necessarily a issue of hit points that bosses have. I mean, maybe it is in some cases, but it might just be like the mechanics of item usage and how fast attacks come out and stuff like that. You know, maybe that would look different if I was able to redo some stuff, but you know, hard to say. I didn't realize the Cathedral Gauntlet would be as much of a problem as it was for some people. Like, I knew it was going to be hard, but I know it's a stopping point for a lot of people. And so maybe giving people a few more like consumables before that, or toning down certain parts of the encounter would help. I think the idea of being able to choose the order in which you approach a bunch of really tricky challenges and having to sort of do time management about when you get your refills and stuff like that is sort of interesting from a design perspective, but maybe some of the challenges were a little bit too stiff.
Would you say it was intentional that the game sort of misled about its focus on mystery in general? Like, was the foil of like, this is Zelda Souls? Yeah, I didn't say that. Like, kind of a head fake to kind of push the gaze away from the mystery component? Or did it just kind of like work out that way sometimes?
I guess it sort of worked out that way. Like, I don't feel like we were especially cagey about, like, part of the pitch was isometric action adventure. You're running around, you're exploring the wilderness, and hey, it's got this really technical combat with like a dodge roll and maybe there's some parrying. Also, there's collectibles that are manual pages that, just like in the days of old, have cool secrets hidden in them. At that point, the extra layers of, you know, secret codes and hidden puzzle book sort of stuff was obviously secret stuff that we didn't want to talk about. And part of the delight of that is realizing they exist at all. So I guess so. Like we talked about the surface layer, layer 0. Like, here's what it looks like. Here are its influences. And then we hinted at that there were secrets. And maybe that's just enough of a, like, hey, the corner of this sticker is sort of peeled up a little bit. Like, I wonder if there's something underneath. Ooh, neat. Priming people for that delight without necessarily spilling the beans that there were extra layers underneath. Because as I've said here and many times before, my favorite thing is realizing, oh, wait, there's an extra dimension. There's not just more content, there's an extra dimension to the content that I already thought I had explored, right? That's the thing that makes you feel like this world could go on forever. And so that needed to be kind of secret.
You've talked about the NYU talk, but like opening the secret or the questions early, but then holding on to them as long as possible was like, I think the biggest change from like sort of like the inspiration of Fez to like the realization of this game was it's like the secrets were there, but they were like the very last thing, you know, like it was not integral to the experience throughout, sort of, or the bigger secrets. Yeah. So in that same NYU talk, you talked about be careful with symmetry, which like that kind of blew my mind a little bit, because I think I've always struggled with, like, as soon as you see it, you're like, I'm not interested anymore. And I've never been able to articulate it like that. So thank you. Like, that little graph you drew in the talk was like, oh, yes, this is what this is called. Okay, I got it. Where do you think that worked in Tunic? Like, were there specific changes you were like, oh, we have to change this so that these areas are not the same? Or
I think it probably started less symmetrical and slowly became symmetrical in some ways, as just like actual game designy pacing questions needed to be answered. So it's a little bit weird that you, like, the way that the game works is you're sort of introduced to this idea of ring 2 bells. Or, as in your playthrough, you do a bunch of stuff before you get that cutscene. And you go off and you get a sword and you ring 1. And you're like, okay, cool. Now I'm going to do something else and I'm going to ring the other one. Maybe this is a really short game. Maybe this is chapter 1 or whatever. That second bell is quite different. You end up going through like 1, 2, 3, 4 plus areas, usually having like sight lines to this thing that you're supposed to be getting to, which is sort of, like a weird asymmetry. And part of me during development realized like, this is a problem. Like, we need to give people something along the way. It sort of sucks that they're bouncing around this place, constantly being teased with this thing that maybe they've forgotten about, and then they leave and they have to come back. Like, it was a worry in my mind that was going to be a problem. Anyway, and then the sort of like the chapter or act 2, I guess you'd call it, of going off and finding 3 highly symmetrical MacGuffins, was something that speaks to classic video games, Zelda and the like. So that was where that came from, but I wanted to be sure that symmetry was broken, where in one case there is an ancient guardian from which you steal it. Classic. Another one, you go deep down into the cave where it was, and it's not here. Somebody else already took it. And then in the other one, it's an entirely different area again, and somebody else is about to take it. And having all of those just be a little bit different was important, but they all ended up following sort of a similar structure in a lot of ways, where there's sort of a preliminary area and then a main area, whether it's the spider cave and then the fortress, or the atoll and the frog cave and then the library. And I think that just happened because of normal everyday game design. The fairies as well there's like a fixed number of them, and you go and you can find as many of them as you care to. And so making sure that those were not necessarily all completely different, but at least had the potential to delight you by not just all being the same. Like maybe there's 2 or 3 that are tiles in the ground, and 1 or 2 that are, here's a number of things and you need to figure out which order they go. Just having them not too homogenous, if that makes sense.
It has kind of developed, or the game itself has kind of developed a colloquial understanding, like, oh yeah, you can translate this, right? Was that expected, that like people that came to this game a year, 2, 3 later might have kind of a different perspective on what the deal with this was? Or do you feel like that is something you wish you could have like mitigated a little bit more?
So ever since Fez, people have been looking at stuff and being like, oh, it's a secret language, cool. I went into Fez knowing that there were some secrets, didn't bother trying to decode the language. My partner, on the other hand, first time she played Fez, was just like, first screen of text, all right, that's a corpus, let's go, figure out everything, build the entire character cipher. And so I knew that people were gonna do that. There were people at Stugan, her included, that were just like, oh, I'm gonna figure out the language based on like a couple of screenshots that you'd shown. And then well before release, there's one person who just like turned the whole thing inside out, like knew the whole thing, was emailing me being like, you did this weird thing, that's strange. I don't know if they went so far as to point out spelling errors or whatever, but like they knew how it worked. So I knew that was going to happen. And I think part of the challenge was trying to communicate to people that they didn't have to, and making it just different enough that people weren't going to do the sit down and bust it wide open with a single piece of text normally. Like, I knew some people were going to try and some people were going to be able to do that. But I think making it not a straight letter for letter English cipher helped there, that you look at something just long enough to be like, oh, let me see if I can piece this together. Nah, like the way that the characters run together and are sort of confusing looking is just enough for people to be like, oh, is it top to bottom? Is the top different from the bottom somehow? Is this like, there's just enough red herrings and stuff in there that the hope was that it would just put people off long enough for them to realize It's not super important. I don't need to figure this out. But I don't know if it's, unless you are going out of your way to make your in-game video game text not look like text. I think people are going to assume that there's something there to find. Yeah, and it was meant to be just sort of an Easter egg. It's like, oh yeah, this text actually means something. It's just meant to be this textural, like add texture to the world sort of feeling, like, oh, I'm playing a Japanese import game, or I don't know how to read English yet, or something like that. And it was going to be like an Easter egg that it actually meant something. We wanted to be very sure that there wasn't too much that required it. And so like one achievement, sort of rounding things out. And it's only like, I'm pretty sure you don't, like aside from like 100% of the game, you don't ever have to do that. Like all the content will open up. Yeah.
Do you have a conscious, like complete thought of like, this is exactly what the story is in this game? Like if you didn't want there to be mystery, right? Could you just like lay it out and someone could look at it and be like, everything clicks? I'm not asking for any details. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, or is it like more of a, there is vagueness in even your internal understanding of it?
Yes, because I cherish that vagueness. I love Bloodborne, and I understand that the Japanese text in Bloodborne is a lot more explicit and maybe easier to understand than what we got in North America. But the how open to interpretation it is, I love, and so I like to be able to look at other people's interpretations of this thing and take loose ends that I maybe sort of smashed into a little bit of a shape. And yeah, I've got an understanding of maybe how it all fits together, but I don't think it's entirely 100% internally consistent, right? I think maybe internal inconsistency is actually baked into it a little bit. But I love that. I love games where there is a ground truth that you're trying to uncover, but I also love games where part of the experience is trying to strive for that ground truth and it always being a little bit slippery.
You don't have to answer this, but the disquiet beings in this story, to me, immediately evoked whatever they are called in Fez. Is that, are they both like referencing the same kind of source material, or was that more of like, I want to reference my memories of this game?
If it is the latter, I think it is subconscious. So it could be that I think like, ancient monstrosities from beyond the pale, the other side of human understanding often have that sort of look for whatever reason. With the three dots even. Mm-hmm. This is actually surprising and new to me. So yeah, if it was subconscious, but I think, maybe it's, God, I love Fez so much.
To wrap things up, does Tunic's design philosophy of like, introducing the question early, holding it open for as long as possible, is that like meaningful to you outside of Tunic, outside of game design?
Yeah, I think if we phrase it as the value of not knowing, then yes. If I am watching maybe less watching a TV show, but maybe like just having some sort of experience, speculating about how things connect is exciting to me, and that moment of not knowing is cool. So much of my life and how I think about things ties into video games that it's sort of hard to have those things extricate themselves from one another. But I value a secret a lot. And things like, mystery stories, I guess, or sort of games in themselves, like trying to piece together things and understand how they might fit, is cool. But that's sort of just like a game design thing, in a sense. So yeah, I guess I'm going to have to think about that some more in the abstract. Does does having open questions figure into my life on a daily basis? Maybe. I mean, I love making to-do lists and knowing how things are going to go on a day-by-day basis. But when it comes to exploration, the moment that I love the most is not knowing.
Besides its obvious success, like how have you changed as a person because of this like experience?
Yeah, well, it is a thing to be like, I was this person and then I made this game and suddenly it's like that. This is a not insignificant chunk of my life, which is kind of wild. But it has made me examine the sort of ways where I've lucked out, the sort of privilege that I've been able to experience firsthand, and makes me sort of look at the things that could have happened and think, wow, how lucky am I that things worked out the way that they did. My partner was able to hang out with a lot of cool people and forge important relationships and make something that has delighted people in the seemingly, some people has delighted them in exactly the way that we wanted to delight them. And I can't think of anything more creatively satisfying than that. It's also left me in a weird spot where I am doing my best to do all the things that need to be done, and there are plenty of them. Things like, writing newsletters and announcing merch and taking a look at those last few bugs and making sure that this build is going to be ready for this platform for the physical release, and traveling and that sort of thing. But I have also had to put a lot of effort, and we'll have to continue to put more effort into understanding like what my life is on the day-to-day now. Not just like, oh wow, everything's nothing but sunshine and roses because you released a video game, but what is it like now to return to, like, to not even return to life, like develop a new schedule when for 7 years I had a clear focus of, here is this one project that I'm bending my entire will towards, and it is okay because that's the thing that I am. It's the thing that defines my being. And then for that now to be gone, what does it mean to work on things? And that's something that I'm still working on.
Is there a fear that this was too good? Like, how can I ever, I'm serious. Like, how, it was so well received, and like, is there that fear of, how do I follow this up?
Yeah. Anytime I think about making something, I think, wouldn't it be nice if I did A, B, and C? Will there be the expectation that it is this kind of game again? And like, no, maybe it won't be. Maybe it'll be something entirely different. But I like adding secrets to things, and so maybe I will, and I don't want it to spiral into another 7-year project. Or I want to make something small and cool with characters in it. And I don't know, it sometimes it feels like it needs to be so different that expectation isn't there. But I don't know. I do like adding secrets to things. So, I don't know. Hard to say. I need a disclaimer at the front. There's no secrets in here.
This is not secretly Tunic 2.
It's definitely not.
Yeah. I have a lot more I want to ask, but I will save it for another time. I am not exaggerating when I say that my cheeks like physically hurt because I've been grinning for the last 4 or 5 hours. So this was amazing. I'm very thankful that not only you've given me your time today, but also just like I hate to say friendship. I don't want,
We're friends. That's allowed.
Okay, I'll go out on a limb and say friendship. I'm at a loss for words. I'm very thankful for what your creation has kind of brought into my life. and what it continues to mean to me and the people I've been able to meet. And I'm very excited to see you play the randomizer tonight.
I'm nervous about it, and thank you. I think that I couldn't ask for a better person to be the face, the representative of the speedrunning community, and I really appreciate all the cool stuff that you've done, both related to speedrunning and the other things in the community for the game. So I feel again very lucky to be to have that sort of community and good folks around.
Yeah, we definitely feel the same way. So thank you. Yeah, I guess that'll do it until we meet back up tonight. I will see you then. Thank you so much again 1,000 times for your time.
Absolutely.
I know I said it in the video a number of times, but thank you so much, Andrew, for your time. The number of hours that you chose to be willing to sit down with me to discuss all things Tunic is very appreciated, and will live on for Tunic fans for some time. So I think I can say we all appreciate it very much. Thank you for watching the video. I know this is not like my normal stuff. I follow my passion where it leads, so I appreciate anybody who's watched along and enjoyed the video. I think passion is also the reason that Tunic turned out the way it did. It's very clear that there was a very strong burning desire to communicate some ideals and some feelings along the way from Andrew and the rest of the team. You can see it in the impeccable audio design and original soundtrack that comes along with the game. There's just a lot of passion that went into this, and it's appreciated. I feel very lucky to have experienced it, and I think we should all feel very lucky not only that this game came together in the way that it did, against all odds, which it feels like most games fight against, but I think we should appreciate every time something like this comes out into the world that enriches our lives, that people like Andrew and his team put years, almost a decade of work into something that we experience for just a matter of days, is something I don't think I'll ever quite come to terms with, how lucky we are to be able to experience something like that. So thank you again, everyone. Thank you everybody that helped me review the video: Shay, Zuna, Cooper, BMO, Dave, Lokai, Tyler. I'm sure there's more of you out there, and I apologize if I didn't mention you, but your help in reviewing such a large video and giving me feedback is really appreciated. Thank you. I think I'll probably have a link to the randomizer that we played that evening if you want to see that or you're into that. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and yeah, until next time. I don't have to be perfect.
Nobody needs to be perfect.
Well, I don't know about that.
Perfect is the enemy of done, right? Or perfect is the enemy of good? Yeah.
Is that what you were thinking in 2016?
Of course.